And we are recording this event. So with that, I'll go ahead and go through introductions. Markel.
Yes, Chair Stucci will go through executive committee member attendance today. So we'll start with you, Chair Stucci.
I am here.
All right. Vice Chair Shiv Batra.
Yeah, Shiv Batra. I'm here too.
Good to see you. Senator Joe Nguyen. Senator Mona Das. Senator Curtis King. Senator Ann Rivers. Representative Sharon Shoemake. Representative Shelley Kloba. Representative Mary Dye. Representative Matt Banky. Captain Jason Cuthbert sitting in for John Batiste.
Here.
David Fort sitting in for Mike Kreidler.
Here.
Teresa Bernstein.
Here.
Ted Bailey sitting in for Roger Millar.
Here.
Debbie Driver. Joel Sachs. Cami Feek.
Here.
Bill Kehoe. Laura Johnson. Shelley Baldwin.
I'm here.
Dr. Ian Hai Wang. Justin Layton.
Here.
Bruce Agnew sitting in for Tom Alberg.
Here.
Kelly Rula sitting in for City of Seattle.
Here.
Kurt Augustine.
Here.
Brenda Wiest.
Here.
Todd O'Brien. Jessica Ramirez. Brian Mistely.
Here.
Laura Ray. Bryce Yaden. Ian Williams sitting in for Ariel Wolf.
Here.
Steve Gordon.
Here.
Annabelle Chang. Anna Zevarts. All right, and Dr. Ian Hai Wang, I see you just popped on.
Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Good morning,
Morning.
Doc.
All right, so we have 17 out of 35 in attendance.
Thank you.
And do
Okay.
we want to take a minute to introduce folks that are proxies for executive committee members?
I think that would be good. So
Okay,
please.
I can just run down the list. Captain Jason Cuthbert. If you want to just take a minute and introduce yourself.
Yeah, good morning. I'm sitting in for Assistant Chief McCoy. I've been with the Washington State Patrol for almost 20 years, and I'm with the Motor Carrier Safety Division.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good morning.
David Fort sitting in for Mike Kreidler.
Yes, I'm here.
David, did you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep, I am David Ford. I serve as the Property and Casualty Policy Advisor for Commissioner Craig. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Welcome.
Great. Ted Bailey representing Roger Millar.
Good morning, everyone. I've been at WashDOT for since 1999. I'm the current Cooperative Automated Transportation Program Manager. I've been involved with REMA and the Commission on the subcommittee process, the creation of it since its inception, and I'm involved regionally in national and AV policy work. Good to be here.
Good to see you, Ted. Bruce Agnew sitting in for Tom Alberg.
Yeah, good morning. Bruce Agnew. I'm the Executive Director of the ACES Northwest Network. I'm here representing from Madrona Troop, Miss Lee from.
You were a little broken up there, Bruce, just so you know, but I think we got the gist of it. Thank you.
All right. Kelly Rula, sitting for City of Seattle.
Hello, everyone. Kelly Rula here. I lead our new mobility group at the city, Seattle DOT, and I'm sitting in. We've got interim director, soon to be director, hopefully in the fall. Thanks all.
Welcome.
And Ian Williams, sitting in for Ariel Wolf.
I'm Ian Williams. I'm an attorney with Venable in Washington, D.C. We represent the Automated Vehicles Industry, Autonomous Vehicles Industry Association. And prior to that, I was a researcher and postdoc at the University of Michigan Law School studying AVs and emerging transportation technology.
Wonderful. Welcome. Thank you.
All right. Did we miss any executive committee members? Doesn't sound like it.
Okay,
All right,
great.
Jim.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. This is going to be a great meeting today. We've got a lot on our agenda, so we're going to get started right away. And up first is Bill Covington, director, and Andrew Raitt, a student, University of Washington Technology Law and Public Policy Clinic.
All right. Let's see. Can people see the first slide?
It says you're starting to screen share, so we'll see here. Yes, we can see your slide.
Thank you for giving us time to present today. And if we can go to the next slide.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to have the opportunity to share my and my fellow students' work at the University of Washington School of Law. Let's go to the next slide.
For those who don't know me, my name is William Covington. I'm a teaching professor at the University of Washington School of Law, where I direct the Technology Law and Public Policy Clinic. The Tech Law Clinic looks at issues where technology and public policy intersect. We've spent many years exploring policies surrounding connected and automated vehicles. With me today is Andrew Raitt, a Master of Jurisprudence student and the lead student attorney on our CAV project team.
Yes, hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Raitt. I'm the lead attorney to the CAV team, and I am proud to also introduce the other members of the project team. We spent an entire academic year establishing a public-facing database, gathering policy information from around the country, and conducting an in-depth examination of the Americans with Disabilities Act and its application to driverless vehicles, especially driverless commercial vehicles like taxis. The members of the project team are Tatiana Barraza, Erica Baikov, Ramita Kondapuri, Carl Rustad, Ryan Tercy, and Sean Olafson. Now I'd like to express regrets on behalf of my team. They were unable to make it to the live meeting today. We worked very hard on this project through the whole year, and we were very much looking forward to sharing our findings with you. Unfortunately, this year's meeting coincides at a time when we at the law school are just beginning our summer associate jobs, so they weren't able to make it today. Nevertheless, my team has put together a great pre-recorded report on our white paper, and I'm excited to show you that later in the presentation.
And what we'd like to do today is share with the executive committee the work we've accomplished in academic year 2021-2022. And Andrew will tell you what our presentation consists of.
That's right. Our presentation is made up of sharing a database which contains information we've gathered from exploring CAV policies from around the country, presenting information on our study of driverless taxis and how this interacts with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if we wanted to also give a few short remarks by Sean Olafson, who is our intern, database creator who helped us with the website. We'll also give a summary statement, and then we'll take your questions. A lot of people have asked me how I became interested in autonomous vehicle law and how I got into technology law in general. And I think one of the things that fascinates me the most about this field of work is that the law has inherently been developed for centuries to be human-centric. Now with the advent of AI, autonomous vehicles, machine learning, what have you, society is suddenly reckoning with automatic decision-making systems that in some regards can cognitively outcompete even the smartest person. And so we're in a truly fascinating era as we break the iceberg of computer autonomy, and I'm so glad to see so many of you here today share similar interests as me. So let's get started into the work that we've done. So giving just a quick overview of the database work we've done, as states have begun to implement their own autonomous vehicle policy, the clinic at the University of Washington has been tasked with monitoring and reporting progress across the country. Each year, clinic members check state government websites, news feed, law review articles, college research labs, the National Conference of State Legislature, and more to curate an ever-expanding database of AV work that's being accomplished in each state. This is what they call a 50-state survey. Not only do we look at legislation that is passed in each state, we also take care to weigh it against failed legislation and record state measures to implement liability and testing requirements, infrastructure development, safety reports, and oversight departments. This year, in recognizing the complicated interactions between all of these aforementioned factors, we wanted to create a way to easily view the relative status of each state's autonomous vehicle work. So accordingly, we, and I guess kind of in line with the themes of like vehicles and traffic, we developed a stoplight color rating system that rates states either green, yellow, or red based on the level of their present work in the autonomous vehicle space. A challenge for us was operationalizing these variables in order to come up with a somewhat consistent way of rating states. But ultimately we decided on a rating system based on how friendly states were towards AV in terms of legislation. So we kind of balanced pass versus fail legislation. We also looked at the business incentives that states have presented and infrastructure that they have put into developing it. We also examined where AV companies were headquartered, and we're surprised to see that some states like Virginia was one of my favorites, have adopted more hands-off regulatory policy that has attracted many AV companies to do work in their state. So in our rating system, which you can kind of see on the right of the screen with the map there, a green color rating represents leaders who are actively engaged and frequently passing legislation or inviting AV companies to do work or testing. You'll see a lot of the usual suspects. I mean, California is there, of course, us here in Washington, Nevada. I'm sure many of you know that there's lots of testing that goes on there. But there are also a lot of unexpected leaders as well. Arkansas is one that my team has found particularly funny because it's surprisingly pro CAV. There have been 4 bills that have been enacted and none have failed. A yellow state denotes states that are either just starting out in their CAV work, or they've dedicated work groups to future research of autonomous vehicles, or they have a lot of pending legislation. A good example of this is Utah. While limited, we designated red states as states that have minimal efforts to no efforts to even attempt AV policy. Kansas is one of these states, as there's been absolutely no legislation so far. So another goal of this project was to translate the information to this database into a public-facing, accessible website that anybody could use to guide research, monitor progress of policy development of other states, or indulge their curiosity. So now I would like to show you the website that we've been working on. It's been publicly, it's going to be publicly accessible. So let's get that loaded up. All right. Can everybody see the Great Seal of Washington?
Yes, yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So here we have on the website, this is Washington's, but of course we have every state in the District of Columbia we've done work on. So it's going to be consistent across the board. So when you access the website, you go to state, you'll see the state seal. And here you'll see we have the state name, the status. So Washington, like I said, is green because we feel like there was a lot of work being done in autonomous vehicles here, as we all know. So it's a great example to set for other states. And then we have all the state law that's been enacted. Now in the next row, we have the explanation of state law. So going down to, so up here, there's, bill number 4 is House Bill 2970, which is pretty much the reason we're all here, I suppose. So, 4 just has the explanation relating to the establishment of an autonomous vehicle work group, adding a new section to RCW, what have you. So this is just a brief, quick overview of the bills, in case anybody just needs it for their research. And then we also look at failed legislation in the next column. We wanted to keep track of all of that. Like I mentioned, we keep account of passed versus failed legislation, and we wanted to show off the best we can everything that's being done in AV work, good or bad. The next column over, we have testing, and one of the nice things about the testing column is that we like to include sources. So NVIDIA testing in Redmond, we try to include nice sources that you could look at if you want to research more about the subject. So going down to testing requirements, we also wrote about testing requirements. So anything that the state has established for testing autonomous vehicles in their state, what their rules are. Also, there's an oversight department to show who is responsible for what. So here we have, testing without operators present. Again, there's a source. So if you wanted to look at that, very easy to, this is from the DOL Washington website. So it's very easy to verify these claims. And then crashes. One of the things that we like to do is we like to look at news reports. So if there's any kind of autonomous vehicle incidents, we try our best to keep a record of that. I mean, it's very difficult to keep track of all 50 states, but we try to include at least, 1 or 2 safety incidents if we can find them, as well as the liability insurance requirements that are required for each state. So I'll just for the purposes of the presentation, I will show you a couple of the other a couple of the other states. Let's go to Arkansas. Was one that I mentioned before because I thought it was really interesting. And so here is Arkansas's state. So here you can see, Arkansas, it's status green. Explanation allows for, explanation of state law. Arkansas somehow has no failed legislation. We recorded the oversight department. I guess they don't have a lot of testing in Arkansas, so there are no crashes or safety incidents, but hopefully this can get populated if incidents arise. And just to show you a yellow state, just for to show you what kind of our measure was for judging yellow states. I think our team chose New York as a good example of a state that we rated as surprisingly yellow, which I would have thought that it would have been kind of like a green state because, you know, New York is very tech forward. Of course, it's the biggest city in America. So, but the reason for this is that there's just a lot of pending legislation. So as you can see here, New York state law there's 2 passed bills, but there's lots pending. So we'll see how it turns out. It'll probably turn green eventually. New York City has municipal laws that are kind of open to more testing. So it's going to be an interesting environment to see. And yeah, I mean, New York State is also interesting because their work is done under the supervision of the New York State Police, which our team felt was interesting because a lot of states don't necessarily rely on the police. They have their own, they have separate oversight departments. So that's pretty much the website. Of course, every state is there. It is publicly accessible now, but it's still on the test website. So what we're working on presently, right this week, is we're just going to port all of this information we have on the test website onto the actual UW EDU website, which is going to be database.uw.edu for anybody to access if they're interested in seeing our work. So moving on now, let's move into the asynchronous presentation that my team has put together. Our white paper aims to look at the Americans with Disabilities Act and to what extent these laws must be applied to autonomous vehicle ride services. Right now, here and across the nation, we're in this interesting liminal space in autonomous vehicle laws where not all of the fine points have been ironed out yet. With that being said, it feels like society can be changed by the flip of the switch thanks to AI and by extension, autonomous vehicles. I mean, one day we're all driving to work and the next day all of a sudden we're doing work through these remote meetings, and soon we may even be driven to work with driverless vehicles like the Jetsons or something. One thing that served as a kind of revelation to my team, though, was that the whole notion of having your car drive you to work holds particular and special significance for many people in the disabled community. For those with the kinds of disabilities that make it impossible or otherwise incredibly difficult for them to drive, like people with blindness or mobility issues, being able to have a reliable means of transportation to, say, a downtown job normally involves so many more steps than an able-bodied person may deal with. For example, one of the articles we discovered said that people often have to rely on friends or family members for transportation, and that's, we all know how difficult it can be to coordinate any kind of schedule with other people, and it's even more complicated for them. You have to have somebody pick you up and drive you to an appointment or drive you to work and then pick you up from there and drive you back. It's a lot of extra work. Autonomous vehicles, though, they have a potential to be an utter game changer for those who need it. Going back to my earlier point about how fast technology can change society, I think it's also critical to strongly advocate for equity in these technologies as early as possible in the technology's development to ensure nobody's left behind in their ability to use, enjoy, and benefit from these crazy new inventions. So here, the clinic, equity for new technologies, regardless of who is using them, is really a personal conviction to many of us. I found generally across my studies that these kinds of incredibly advanced technologies are really in the eye of the beholder. There are truly so many possible good and bad ways autonomous technology can be used. And as I'm sure many of you are probably aware, getting a jump on these subjects, or at least engaging with the questions they present, is better addressed sooner than later. Being in such a tech-forward state like Washington means we have a lot of opportunities to work on these problems. My team wanted to learn about how accessibility works for autonomous vehicles, so we undertook this white paper as kind of a meta-analysis and literature review on the current and future work being done in this area to hopefully bring light to some policy ideas that may help guide future implementation of this technology. So my team's put together a great summary of our findings in a video lecture format, and I'm excited to share that with you now. So as we move into the presentation, the people who will speak in order of their appearance are Ramita Kondapudi, Ryan Tercy, Carl Restad, Tatiana Barraza, and Erica Bykov. They're all wonderful rising students here at the law school who will be entering their third and final year. We also have just a very short presentation from our intern, Sean Olafson, who's an undergraduate at the University of British Columbia. Sean's done some great work for us in helping develop this project and has an incredible enthusiasm for AV affairs in general. So as part of his studies up at UBC, Sean has asked to write his own paper on AV ethics with us over the summer. And so that's what he'll be sharing with us too. So let's get that started. Oops. All right, can everybody see the video slides?
I believe so.
Individuals with disabilities in the US?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, let's get that started. And let me know if anybody has a hard time hearing it.
A significant portion of the United States population experiences a disability. This graphic from the CDC shows that the top 3 types of disabilities in the country relate to mobility, cognition, and independent living. These impairments can impact an individual's ability to work, run errands, experience social life, and most relevant for our purposes, navigate the city or area in which they live. We believe that autonomous vehicle systems can aid in improving the mobility of disabled individuals. But first, when we're designing new accessible autonomous vehicle programs, we need to consider what kinds of challenges disabled individuals face when using the transportation options that are available today. We focus on the transportation concerns of individuals with mobility issues, since it's the most common type of disability in the US. Our findings, however, are relevant to all types of disabilities. First, we look at planning concerns. We found on reports online that disabled individuals find routes that require changes in modes of transportation challenging to plan for. I asked Google Maps to take me from Bellevue College to UW Law by public transportation. Google Maps suggests a route that includes walking twice and taking a bus in the middle. It doesn't show, however, at first glance that the last 0.1 miles is up a hill, and it will take more than 2 minutes for someone in a wheelchair or someone that uses another type of mobility aid to walk up that hill or to traverse up that hill. Another planning concern is accounting for unmapped spaces. Mapping services like Google Maps, Apple Maps have a large repository of street views. As you can see on the left, a large majority of the roads in the US are mapped with street view. There are still swaths of land that have not been mapped though. For example, in Jackson, Wyoming, there are a number of streets that do not have street view. Without street view, an individual with mobility issues may not be able to check for ramps, curb cuts, sidewalk access, and other facilities that they need to account for when planning a trip. An individual may also face physical obstacles when navigating a city or town. For example, some destinations may have stairs, but no ramps, or elevators might be difficult to access or far away. Older cities, which were designed and built when accessibility was not a concern, may have storefronts with steps. While public transportation now has accessibility options for wheelchairs, there are a limited number of them. Similarly, if you want to take a rideshare service like Uber or Lyft, you are limited to the types of vehicles around you. Unless a driver happens to have an accessible vehicle, someone with mobility issues is out of luck. Finally, unsafe street spaces are a real concern. While Google Maps accounts for real-time traffic on roads, it does not always tell you whether a sidewalk is closed or whether a detour has been put in place. Busy street spaces, especially in rush hour traffic, along with construction or other blocks on the road, can pose problems to someone who has trouble walking. This includes narrow or unevenly paved sidewalks, objects blocking pathways such as illegally parked vehicles, trash cans, and as we've started to see more recently, e-scooters and micromobility devices. I was surprised and disturbed to learn that a number of disabled individuals report that in public spaces, their personal space and personal boundaries are not always respected. Able-bodied passengers sometimes handle equipment or touch those with disabilities without permission. There are also a limited number of public transportation officials who are adequately trained to help. In the event of an emergency, no matter the type of disability, officials are not properly trained to seek out help. This can be a significant hazard. For example, if an individual's wheelchair pops out of a fixture on a bus, that could be dangerous for not only the disabled individual, but those around them. Finally, disabled individuals report a number of technology concerns. King County offers accessible vehicle services, but very few other municipalities or counties in the US do the same. And finally, when an individual depends on technology to navigate public transportation, their whole planning process can be thrown off when that technology is faulty. Those who are hard of hearing may rely on automatic visual stop announcements, or someone who is visually impaired might rely on audio announcements. Breakdowns of those systems can pose challenges, especially if a disabled individual is traveling alone.
Hello, my name is Ryan Tersey, and first I would like to apologize for being unable to attend today's Executive Council meeting during the live presentation, but I want to thank Rima Griffith for allowing us to present this pre-recorded presentation. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Americans with Disabilities Act, while Carl and Tatiana will provide additional details about the ADA and public transportation. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by President George H.W. Bush in 1990. The ADA was then amended in 2008, and those amendments were signed by President George W. Bush. The ADA consists of 5 titles. Title I, covering employment, applies to employers that have more than 15 employees and is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This provision requires that employers make reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities. Title II prohibits discrimination by public entities at all levels of government. Title II is enforced by multiple federal agencies. The U.S. Department of Justice promulgates regulations under Title II for governmental entities at the local, county, and state level. The U.S. Department of Transportation promulgates regulations under Title II as it relates to public transportation provided by public entities. This is separate from other disability enforcement laws that the U.S. Department of Transportation is responsible for. For example, there is the Air Carrier Access Act, which applies to airplanes. Title III prohibits discrimination when it comes to public accommodations and requires public accommodations be made accessible to those with disabilities. Public accommodations include hotels, restaurants, and stores, among other publicly available locations. In addition, the ADA has been found to not only apply to the store's physical location, but also its website as well. Title IV amended the Communications Act of 1934 by requiring telecommunications companies ensure equivalent services for customers with disabilities. Finally, Title V mostly consists of technical provisions, such as clarifying that the ADA does not override the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and also includes an anti-retaliation provision. The ADA defines the term disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual, a record of such impairment, or being regarded as having such impairment. The 2008 amendments added examples of major life activities. These examples include, but are not limited to, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working. Finally, I should note that the term disability is construed broadly, favoring providing coverage to as many individuals as possible. While Carl and Tatiana will provide additional details on Title II, I thought I'd provide one example of how the ADA regulates public transportation. The ADA requires that public entities which operate a bus system purchase or lease buses which are readily accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities, including individuals who use wheelchairs. Thank you for your time today.
So my name is Carl Rusted, and I'm going to be talking about how the ADA interacts with autonomous vehicles. So the ADA regulates all transportation providers, including autonomous vehicles. And early lawsuits against private rideshare companies like Uber indicate that there's probably little ADA applicability to these services. Therefore, the public sector could play an important role in encouraging accessibility with autonomous vehicles. So Ramos versus Uber is one of the early rideshare company cases involving the ADA. And allegations against Uber under the ADA survived summary judgment. And those were under sections 49 CFR 37.29 and 42 CFR 12184. And they survived summary judgment, even though Uber strenuously objected to the applicability of the sections. And the fact that these claims did make it so far could indicate the scope of ADA applicability to private autonomous vehicle services as they become common. The first statute that Uber was sued under was 49 CFR 37.29, regulating taxi services, which Uber was classified as preliminarily for the purposes of this lawsuit. And taxi services may not refuse to provide services to those who can use them, refuse to assist in stowing mobility devices, or charge higher fees for those with disabilities. And the allegations in this case is that Uber was refusing to provide services to those who could use them. The second statute Uber was sued under was 42 CFR 12184, which applies to servicers primarily engaged in the business of transporting people, also providing specified public transportation services. And Uber, of course, objected to both of these characterizations, but they survived summary judgment. And under those provisions, such providers may not have eligibility requirements tending to screen out those with disabilities, fail to remove barriers to use where those barriers are readily removed, and fail to, if it would not fundamentally alter the service, provide modifications for accessibility or auxiliary aids. So despite the duties that could arise under the regulation of these two statutes for companies like Uber and other autonomous vehicle companies in the future, there really aren't very many requirements to increase accessibility under these statutes. Only people who can already use the service are guaranteed to be able to use the service, and only improvements that wouldn't fundamentally alter the service actually have to be done. And because service providers contracting with the government are subject to more ADA provisions, government contracting could be a way to increase accessibility with autonomous vehicles.
Hello, my name is Tatiana Barraza. I'm a 2L at the University of Washington, And today I'm going to be speaking about the applicability of Americans with Disabilities Act in public transportation. And then I will briefly speak about the ways in which current autonomous vehicle companies are paying attention to this issue of disability accessibility. So in order to see how the Americans with Disabilities Act could apply to connected and autonomous vehicles, we must first familiarize ourselves with ADA compliance in public transportation. So we've already heard about the ADA in general terms, and at this point, it would be helpful to consider some of the specific requirements that are imposed by the ADA in public transportation. And among the multiple ADA requirements are equipment and facilities needing to be in good condition, operators expected to provide riders with adequate time to enter and exit each vehicle. Vehicle operators are responsible for announcing stops, including transfer points, major intersections, and destination points. Vehicles must also provide destination and route information. Vehicles must comply with specific letter and size requirements on route information signs. Lifts and platforms must accommodate wheelchairs that are 30 inches by 48 inches in size. Lifts must be capable of supporting 600 pounds of weight. Doors and steps must be of slip-resisting surfaces, and there must be sufficient turning and maneuvering space for wheelchairs. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are a few of the examples that we see today from the ADA. Okay, now it would be helpful to look at an example of how autonomous technology today is actually attempting to comply with the ADA and is looking at this issue of disabilities and addressing some of the pertinent issues. So Waymo launched a pilot program back in 2018 in Phoenix Metro, Arizona. And so the study that they launched was comprised of participants who were either people with various disabilities or citizens aged 65 and older. Now, throughout the study, participants had the opportunity to ride in these semi-autonomous vehicles with an operator on site at all times. And so following the study culminated in a number of self-reports, and among them included the fact that participants expressed feeling safe while riding Waymo vehicles and safe with autonomous driving technology in general. Participants also expressed satisfaction with the efficiency of Waymo's autonomous ride-sharing services. Participants also expressed an intention to use autonomous services more than non-autonomous ride-sharing services. They also expressed thinking that Waymo's autonomous technology enhances mobility for people with varying needs, which is why this is pertinent to the issue at hand. And lastly, they expressed an interest and a willingness to ride autonomous vehicles without an operator on site. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erica Bykov, and I'm a 2L at the University of Washington. To continue our discussion of AV shuttles and the ADA, I turned to a previous successful shuttle pilot that operated in Utah. This pilot program was particularly instructive because they did dedicate resources to understanding what steps they'd have to take to comply with the ADA, but more broadly, how to make the shuttles accessible in ways that go beyond the statute. This is critical when considering that these types of shuttle programs seek to fill first mile / last mile gaps, something that is particularly beneficial for those with disabilities. This pilot program used a level 4 automated easy mile shuttle which was modified to include ramps and constraints, a type of harness for securing wheelchairs. You can see a photo of the shuttle on the right of the screen. Another aspect of this pilot project that was very insightful was their research on the role of the operator when it comes to public transportation. Research was done on passenger trust and whether a shuttle host was visible or disguised, with data showing that a lack of a visible shuttle host can negatively impact passenger trust. Beyond their driving duties, a typical operator often provides guidance such as wayfinding or by notifying of sidewalk hazards, provides safety and comfort to passengers from adjusting climate controls to calling emergency services when needed, acts as an authority figure which may impact passenger behavior for the better, and provides information to riders, such as schedule information and which transfers to take. Additionally, and most critically from an accessibility perspective, operators provide assistance to elderly and disabled passengers, from assistance with seat and floor latches to clearing seats and providing additional information as necessary. Because of this, we believe it would be wise to consider implementing a shuttle host, i.e., an individual who takes the place of an operator and fulfills the non-driving duties a bus driver would usually perform. This would also help reduce the job loss often associated with the concept of driverless vehicles. Turning to the recommendations that arose from this pilot program, they recommended adding raised edges of 1.5 inches for ramps to comply with the ADA, external stop announcements, 2-strap wheelchair securement systems and make them automatic if possible. After speaking with stakeholders from the blind/low vision community, they discovered that there are expectations to hear a transit vehicle approach, which requires extra consideration with notoriously quiet electric vehicles. Double check that printed braille is accurate, which was not the case for one of the labels inside the shuttle, a less steep ramp slope, and stop-specific internal stop announcements.
Good afternoon, members of the Washington State Vehicle Workgroup. My name is Sean Olafson. I'm an undergraduate at the University of British Columbia, and I'm working in collaboration with Andrew Raitt and Dean William Covington on the Autonomous Vehicle Group at the UW Tech Law Clinic. My field is ethics. I know the working group is tasked with casting a wide net on issues that could affect future policy deliberations. And it's my hope that I'm going to be able to contribute to the working group by helping those future policies become more ethically informed. So similar to the Tech Law Clinic's approach to assembling the database reflecting the current state and approaches of policy at a high level across the states, I'm going to be reviewing and summarizing the latest literature on key machine ethics ideas. Ideas like, if testing is done on public infrastructure, to what extent are other road users unconsenting participants in that research? And what would the policy implications of that be? Questions like, in an unavoidable collision scenario, what kinds of decisions should autonomous vehicles be making in terms of whose safety they prioritize under what conditions? And in terms of dictating those decisions that are made, should that come from private enterprise or should it come from public policy? As I explore these and other questions and search for ways to better inform the UWAV group and the State Vehicle Working Group, I welcome those interested to reach out to me. I've listed my contact below. I'm also available through Andrew should anybody wish to speak to me. I certainly welcome opportunities for collaboration, and I invite the work group to share resources that they think might aid in a more ethically informed policy at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. So that was a little recap of the white paper work that we did this this year. So in summary, we're proud to show you the publicly accessible database, which contains information for the 50 states and Washington, D.C. We hope that the state rating system will provide users with an easy way to find the level of involvement a particular state has with autonomous vehicle technology, and we're always looking forward to keeping the database up to date. We've shared information on the Americans with Disabilities Act and autonomous vehicles, and have written some policy recommendations. I'm not sure, we submitted the white paper as part of the presentation submission package to you guys. I'm not sure if that's something that you're able to see, but if it's not, feel free to get in touch with me and we would be glad to give you that paper.
In closing, our tech law and public policy clinic will be in abeyance during the next academic year, but we will be monitoring and updating the database. But our full CAB work will resume in 2023-2024. Thank you for your attention. We are now glad to take any questions that you may have.
Yes, and here's my contact information. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn too, if you'd like. Mr. Forte.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was really informative. Did your group examine when a AV is in level 4 or 5 transporting these folks, that you would consider them a common carrier and those heightened liability requirements?
That's a great question. I think it's difficult in a lot of different ways. There are several moving parts to it. So to answer your question directly, no, we did not look at that specifically, but that's great, and that is something that I think I'd like to now amend to the white paper. A lot of what's going on now with AV testing, we found, is that levels 4 and 5, they aren't very sometimes they don't publish what level the autonomous vehicle is operating at, and sometimes they do, but it's not quite as consistent as we would have liked it to be. So that's why we haven't looked into that as much as maybe we should have.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, David. Other questions or comments for Andrew or Dr. Covington? Please just raise your hand so I can see you or try and get my attention. Other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
Chair Rasucci, this is Ted Bailey, Washington State
Yes,
DOT.
Ted.
I had to increase my screen to find the raise the hand button, so I thought I'd just hop in here. Great presentation. Good to see you, Dr. Covington and Andrew. My only question that I have is related to the database itself and regards to any outreach you have done or are planning to do to those states to verify the information in there, specifically when it comes to where they see themselves in their effectiveness or where they're at as far as leading in the AV space. In particular, the states that I noticed that I would have assumed would have been green would have been Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Florida, for example, is that I would have expected those states to be green, and even Virginia, actually. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for your question. We do have, so it's not published on the website because we weren't sure about privacy and having people's contact information on it, but we do have privately a collection of each state representative, or not representative, but they're people from departments of transportation, senators, and other people that we have contacts for in each state. We did not call them or speak with them personally. We had discussed that question about contacting them, but after trying with one or two, just trying to get a general feel for people's opinions on things, people were so busy that we felt that 50 people or 51, I guess, if you count DC, getting in contact with them and scheduling talks with them would be incredibly difficult to manage with schedules. With that being said, I was also surprised at the level some of the states were, and we had some notes about why we thought each state was colored the way it was. And again, it was a bit difficult to find a way to, you know, scientifically operationalize these variables, but we kind of just took everything all together and tried to base it off of our general feel for it. So I know you mentioned Florida, for example. So here it says, the reason why we chose yellow is that Florida has tried for 28 times to be a leader in the CAV research, development, and deployment, but has only managed to pass 6 relevant bills. So what we did is we just kind of balanced pass versus failed. There are no real restrictions on CAV operations in Florida. The bills are more focused on allocating money for the study of CAV. So it seems to me, according to these notes, that our reason is just that they're still in a lot of the preliminary steps where they're starting to allocate money, but maybe they haven't done as much testing as maybe we would have liked to see. But that can always change. And I think it would be a good idea to try to get in touch with people from each state to see what their thoughts are. So thank you for that recommendation.
And thank you for your explanation. Once your website is live, be happy to coordinate with UW Law School on some outreach. We definitely have connections in most of these states. So thank you.
Oh, we would love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's awesome.
Wonderful. Other questions for Andrew or Dr. Covington? It looks like they're going to let you go, Andrew. Thank you so much. Dr. Covington, Andrew, thank you for your presentation this morning, as well as the questions. Appreciate all the input, and we appreciate your presentation and your colleagues' presentation. So please pass on to them our appreciation as well.
Oh, we will. Yeah, I'm sorry that they couldn't make it. We were all excited to show off our work, but so glad everybody enjoyed it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is we're going to hear from Dr. Alexandra Mueller from the Insurance Institute of Highway Safety. Dr. Mueller, are you ready?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. All right. So as always, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So hopefully this goes well. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Fabulous. All right. So good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, Western, Eastern Seaboard. My name is Alexandra Mueller. I'm a research scientist at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. And today I'm going to talk to you about a program that we recently announced on the safeguards for partial driving automation. Now, before I get into the actual details of the program, there are a couple things that I want to emphasize at the outset right now. First, when we talk about partial driving automation, we're talking about its use within the highway context. There are different applications for partial driving automation. For example, we're seeing different advanced parking assist features and so on. Well, the lessons learned from this program could have ramifications for those types of programs. This program concentrates on highway driving. And specifically, when we talk about partial driving automation in the highway context, we're talking about the simultaneous combination of adaptive cruise control and sustained lane centering. What that means is that the system provides support to the driver to maintain speed and headway. It also provides continuous steering support to the driver to keep the vehicle within the lane. So that's what I mean when I talk about partial driving automation. The reason why this program has become necessary is Some of these technologies that are available in the market today can sometimes give the misinterpretation that they can drive themselves. And the truth is, none of these technologies are meant to replace the driver at any point. Yes, they can provide pretty sophisticated driving support, but that's all they do. They provide support. They assist the driver, typically for the purpose of improving driver convenience and ease of driving, but they in no way are meant to replace the driver, because functional testing of all of these systems, regardless if they offer hands-free driving capability, all of them basically suffer from the same limitations, where they will inevitably encounter conditions where, for example, the system will struggle to keep itself within the lane. The system will struggle to detect a road user or object ahead, all of which require rapid driver intervention, either by applying the brakes, accelerating, or steering, sometimes all of them, one of the two. And from the driver. And it's imperative that the driver understand these system limits and also be able to fulfill their roles and responsibilities about being ready and able to intervene at all times. So really, one way of thinking about this program is that it sets minimum expectations about how automakers should be designing these systems so that these systems are not misused. Because a problem that we're seeing, as I mentioned before, people often misinterpret these systems to be more functionally capable, more autonomously capable than they really are. And these systems just cannot replace the driver. So one thing about this program is it is not an endorsement for partial driving automation. The thing is, we don't know if partial driving automation really does improve the safety of drivers on the road. We know that crash avoidance features do. We have very clear evidence of that. But the results are mixed when it comes to the effects of safety benefits of partial driving automation. So this program is not an endorsement to promote automakers to equip their vehicles with these systems. Rather, it's about setting minimum expectations that if automakers are going to offer this technology in their vehicles, we want to make sure that these technologies are designed in a way that prevent drivers from misusing them. Likewise,
Dr. Mueller, I have a question from Representative Shelley Kloba.
Sure.
Representative Kloba?
Hi, Dr. Mueller. Very nice to see you again. I really enjoy when you come before us and share with us what you've been researching. This is an area that I'm concerned about, and so I'm very excited to hear this. And as you talk about minimum expectations, I think that's a really important concept. Do you think there's any value in those minimum expectations, including things like the language that companies use to describe them? Because I know, as you mentioned earlier, there is a lot of misunderstanding about the capability of these partial driving automation systems. And I don't know if that was anything in what you had contemplated in those minimum expectations about the language used.
That's a really good point. And I will say that it's not something addressed by the program. However, what your concerns are 100% valid. And that is why we're taking extreme care in the language that we use, even to promote this program, even when we're going to discuss the ratings. And even the way we're going about the data collection to inform these ratings, the language that we are choosing and using in media, in these presentations, it's deliberate. Because, and the truth is, you know, the language that you use is only as good as the person, as much as the person interprets that language. So that, of course, is going to be a limitation. And when it comes to these various technologies, a lot of these technologies have similarities between other technologies that have similar functions, at least on the surface, but their behavior and their purpose can be very different. How do you communicate that to the general public who may not know what the subtle nuances are of the different technologies and what the risk factors are when it comes to using the technologies? So with all of that in mind, the way this program has been designed is about, one way you can think about it is requiring automakers to design their systems with guardrails that minimize opportunity for misuse, regardless of the consumer education, regardless of the consumer knowledge of the driver getting behind the wheel. How can these systems shape driver behavior in a way that promote the driver cooperating with the technology to facilitate that interaction and promote safe use of the technology over time? That's really what we care about. And it's actually to that end that we are not looking at the functional performance of these systems. For example, how well they lane keep, or how well they stay in their lane, how well they manage the speed and so on. That is not the point of this program. The point of this program is about user-centric design. How are these systems designed to have the driver stay an active participant in the driving task? Because if the driver is in fact fulfilling the role, if the driver is engaged in the driving, then it doesn't matter how functionally capable these systems are. If, for example, one might be intentionally designed to be quote unquote less reliable or have more trouble staying within the lane, just because that might promote the driver to be more involved in the steering compared to another system that actually seamlessly really doesn't seem to have much struggle staying in the lane. Both of those system design types won't really matter for the purpose of this program as long as the system itself, either system, is designed to have the driver use the technology appropriately. So it's taking another step away from the functional performance and instead focusing on how the driver interacts and also how the expectations about how the technology itself behaves is shaped. So it's actually to that we have tried to develop these categories to reflect the state-of-the-art knowledge that we have about how people interact with partial driving automation. So these categories that I'm going to go through were developed based on what we know about how people interact with this technology. And as we all know, this is a very nascent field. We're still very much learning how people interact with the technologies, and the technology itself is also changing hugely. Every single year, you see new iterations of systems coming out. Actually, even less than a year, you see new systems coming out. The field itself, the technology is changing. So this program will evolve as the data around what we know change and as the technology themselves change. So again, this is going to be an evolving program that will adapt in response to what's technologically feasible in consumer vehicles today. And just so everyone's aware, this whole program exists to address technologies that are available that you can buy in vehicles today. And so what we're requiring also, as you'll see, for example, in the driver monitoring component of this ratings program, we're requiring technologies that, for example, the monitoring of the driver's hand activity. And I'll go into reasons as to why we're doing this, but that's a good example of a technology that is on the cusp of being introduced into vehicles. The prototype technology is there, but that is an example of something that hasn't been implemented yet, but it is in the process of being developed. So again, we're trying to keep this program to be as technology neutral to encourage automakers to come up with innovative solutions around the issues that are highlighted by each category.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. And it sounds as though it's very aligned with principles around target zero that are, using engineering to make it so that it's hard to make a mistake that would be otherwise common. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before I begin?
Other questions or comments? I think you're good, Doctor.
All right. So I'm going to go into all of these categories in detail. I'm also going to explain why these categories even exist. But you can see that it's not just driver monitoring. because a system can have the most robust way of monitoring the driver for indicators that the driver is doing something that he or she should not be doing. However, what does it do with that information? And also, you can't just have a system that is reactive to inappropriate driver or user behavior. You have to have system design philosophies that proactively incorporate the driver and proactively encourage the driver to be to have a sense of agency when they use the technology, so that they are given a sense of autonomy to intervene when they feel it's necessary, or even when they want to, so they're not penalized. And that's, for example, specifically what categories 4 to 6 address. So the categories 1 to 3 rather, address the system's reactions to when it detects that the driver has done something that the driver shouldn't have done. And categories 4 to 6 address more proactive designs to help better shape the user's expectations around where the system limits are, and also what their own rules and responsibilities are. And safety features, of course, if you're going to offer a vehicle technology that does so much in conjunction with the driver, you have to make sure that other vehicle features that have the empirical support for a safety case are also used likewise. So first and foremost, driver monitoring. All forms of driver monitoring, whether it be camera, whether it be steering wheel sensors, all of them monitor driver behaviors that are indicators of whether the driver is in the loop of the driving task, or whether the driver has fallen out, whether the driver is disengaged from the driving task. But none of them are a perfect indicator of the driver's attention. We have no way of 100% accurately identifying what the driver is attending to. But we do know that glance behavior, where the driver is looking, tends to be related to what the driver is paying attention to. We also know that the longer the driver looks away from the road, the higher their crash risk. Now, that's glance behavior, but also what the driver's hands are doing matter as well. We know that when the driver has their hands off the wheel, it's related to the driver's glances being away from the road, because typically someone is doing something that requires the driver to look. And also, that's related to the likelihood of the driver being distracted. We also know that if the driver's hands are occupied, it's going to be difficult for the driver to steer, especially if these steering interventions have to be rapid. So if the driver's hands are allowed to be occupied while using the system, and we know that these systems frequently encounter situations that require rapid steering intervention from the driver, we know there's a risk case there. So monitoring the driver's glance behavior and what the driver's hands are doing are going to be valuable methods of monitoring the driver, but they're going to have to be used simultaneously. The more information you have converging on a signal, the stronger, the more reliable and accurate that signal is going to be. So the more reliable and accurate the driver monitoring is going to be in its ability to detect when the driver is doing something that he or she should not be, and when the driver is doing something that they should be. So that leads us to the first category, which has to do with driver monitoring. It has to monitor the driver for signs that the driver is engaged or disengaged from the driving task. And to do that, it needs to know where the driver is looking, and it needs to know what the driver's hands are doing. It needs to be able to determine if the driver's hands are available for the driver to not just be ready, but also able to intervene at a moment's notice. Does the driver absolutely no good if if the system uses a camera to monitor where the driver is looking, and the driver is looking at a situation happening on the road in front that the driver knows requires intervention, but if the driver is holding a sandwich and a cup of coffee, there's going to be an inherent delay of the driver making their hands available to perform that steering intervention. So again, first category concerns it has to know where the driver is looking, and it has to know what the driver's hands are doing. Now, the second category has to do with communicating to the driver. Okay, so the system has detected that the driver is doing something that they're not supposed to do. How does the system bring the driver back into the loop of the driving task so that the system can then determine that the driver is again fulfilling their role and responsibilities of using the technology? In order for that communication to be effective, timing is crucial. It does the system absolutely no good and does the driver no good if the system has the most robust, effective way of monitoring the driver and can detect very accurately if the driver is no longer in the loop. But if it takes too long for the system to start communicating to the driver, you are essentially allowing that driver to do something inappropriate for too long. And thus, of course, the crash risk increases. So timing is crucial. But these methods of communication also have to be clear and intuitive. Part of accomplishing that is by using visual information to help clarify what the system's communication purpose and what the direction, what the instructions are for the driver so that the driver knows what to do. I'm sure we've all had situations where your vehicle starts chiming at you for some bizarre reason, and you're looking all around your instrument panel for information about why do I hear this chime happening? Again, that adds confusion, that delays the driver's ability to re-enter the loop and to maintain the necessary situational awareness to know what's happening on the road and to intervene when necessary. So again, the non-visual methods of communication, you can think about that as a way of grasping the driver's attention, especially if the driver is not looking at the road. So the non-visual alerts help to capture that driver's attention. But the visual information is still important because that helps give instructions to the driver and context about why the system is communicating in the first place. But of course, the method of visual communication has to also be clear and concise, because if it takes too long for the driver to read the text or to understand what the visual icons mean, again, that's now a new source of distraction from the driver and takes, again, their eyes off the road for too long. So the icons, the language, the text, the alerts, the non-visual alerts, vibration, visual, seatbelt tugging, pulse braking, all of that has to be used in a way that makes sense to the driver. And also, another way of communicating to the driver is to use an escalation process, because you don't want to start screaming at the driver right away. That can produce startle behavior and overwhelm the driver, but you also don't want to allow the driver to be out of the loop for too long. What happens if for some reason, let's say the driver is hard of hearing and can't hear the chimes, or the person might be deaf? What happens if the driver, for whatever reason, has their hands off the wheel, and if the system uses a steering wheel vibration to communicate to the driver is not going to detect that. So again, having an escalation process whereby more modalities are incrementally added increases the chances of the driver detecting the communication and also increases the speed with which the driver responds. So for the second category of this program is concerned something called attention reminders. Basically, that's just a way of describing the system's method of communication to when it detects the driver doing something that he or she's not supposed to be doing. At its core, rapid timing and the utilization of multiple channels of communication is important. As I mentioned before, timing is of the essence. So the system needs to escalate early, whereby more modalities are incrementally added. And that can include also vehicle kinematic behavior. As I mentioned before, pulse braking. It's the rapid application of brakes where it doesn't really produce a speed reduction, but the pulse braking, the vestibular effect that pulse braking has is very difficult for a human to ignore. And what we want to make sure is that not only does the attention reminder escalation process occur with rapid succession, but also that the system escalates to a minimum of 3 modalities. As I mentioned before, for whatever reasons, if the driver doesn't detect the first or the second modality of alert, if you have 3, you radically start increasing the chances of the driver detecting that communication in the first place and responding. Also, the more modalities you use, the more implicitly that communicates to the driver that the communication is urgent. And of course, within each modality, you should also have the communication escalate. For example, you can increase the amplitude and the frequency of an audible or a vibration alert so that it starts to communicate to the driver of, oh, no, okay, you really need to start paying, you really need to return your eyes to the road, or you need to put your hands back on the wheel. So that's around system communication. Now, what happens if the driver doesn't respond? This can be for a number of reasons. Ideally, the attention reminder escalation process should be so salient that the driver should not be able to ignore that communication. But what happens if the driver becomes incapacitated? It's a very real possibility. What countermeasures do these systems have to help reduce the risk of the driver and the risk of other road users on the road if the driver is not responding? The worst case scenarios, there are two worst case scenarios. First and foremost, the system can just continue providing support while it shouts at the driver indefinitely. That's no good. The system is not meant to be used as a self-driving system. So that would be outside its operational design. But also it'd be another worst case scenario just to simply switch off the system. Okay, the driver hasn't responded, so okay, let's just take away the system. Then you have no one controlling the vehicle. So a lesser of these evils, and while certainly not without its risk, but the better scenario is to perform a controlled slowdown or stopping procedure. Because at that point, clearly the driver is not in the loop and the system clearly is not meant to drive itself. It cannot indefinitely drive itself. So the lesser of these evils here is to produce a system response where it's escalated through the attention reminders, driver has not responded, okay, it's going to start performing a controlled slowdown. Sometimes these vehicles bring the vehicle to a very slow traveling speed, or it can bring the vehicle to a physical stop. There are pros and cons with either, but it has been shown that these physical countermeasures do help deter repetitive and prolonged driver misuse of these systems. So for our third category, this has to do with, again, the emergency escalation response to driver noncompliance. Again, the system should never switch off. The vehicle should perform a slowdown or stopping procedure in response to the driver not re-entering the loop. But because the vehicle is slowing down on highway conditions where other road users are traveling at speed still, clearly that's creating a hazardous situation. So the vehicle should automatically place an SOS call either during the slowdown or once the vehicle has come to a stop. Because at that point, if the driver has not intervened, there's probably a medical emergency happening and EMS services should be brought to the scene. Now, of course, the driver can intervene at any point during this vehicle slowdown, or even when the vehicle has stopped, the driver can bring the vehicle back up to speed. However, as soon as the driver has resumed control of the vehicle, the partial driving automation should no longer be available for access for the remainder of the drive, because clearly the driver has been misusing the system. Now, not just that, but also if the system has had to escalate the attention reminder process multiple times during a single drive, at that point, that's a good indicator to the system that the driver is not using the system appropriately, that the driver is, for example, sending emails, before the system escalates to the vehicle slowdown procedure. And if that happens multiple times where the system has detected the driver being out of the loop for extended periods multiple times during the drive, at that point, once the driver resumes, the system should no longer be available to the driver. Even though it hasn't necessarily gotten to the point where the vehicle has performed the slowdown, the fact that the system has recognized that the driver has done multiple prolonged instances of behavior that they weren't supposed to be doing, again, that's another way to trigger that lockout mechanism. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. So far I've been talking about system responses to when the driver does something that they're not supposed to be doing. But these systems are becoming more functionally capable every single day. And adding that functionality can exacerbate a driver's misunderstanding about where the system limits are. Also, they exacerbate the driver's misunderstanding about where the driver's roles and responsibilities are. And risky situations can develop if the vehicle starts to either perform complex maneuvers or begins to move at all before the driver is ready. And unexpected system behavior takes time for a driver to respond to. So that leads us to our fourth category. It has to do with automated lane changing. As the name suggests, this is when the vehicle makes a lane change on behalf of the driver without the driver having to steer to go into the next lane. This feature is not required to get a good rating in our program. In fact, if a system doesn't offer automated lane changing, fantastic, because frankly, there is no safety case yet for automated lane changing. However, if a system is going to offer automated lane changing, it has to do so in a way that has a way of verifying that the driver is still in the loop. So the system should never be able to make the automated lane change on its own without requiring the driver to confirm or even to initiate the lane change. If the vehicle can make this decision-making process and initiate the maneuver on its own without requiring driver input, it will not do well in this category. But if the system will only make the automated lane change if the driver requests it, or if it will not make, it will suggest the lane change maneuver as a possibility for the driver, but it requires the driver to make an overt, deliberate response to tell the system, yes, okay, I want you to make the lane change. Then it has verified that the driver is in the loop, to some extent anyway, before it will make the automated lane change. However, this feature will not receive, will not perform well on this category unless the system as a whole scores well on all the other categories in this ratings program. Because again, all of these categories represent guardrails, safeguards against drivers from being able to misuse the system. So if the system doesn't perform well in the other categories, it's not clear to us that the system really is ensuring that the driver is in the loop. So that's the requirements around automated lane changing. Now, when we talk about system behavior without driver involvement, we know that driver distraction tends to be the most prevalent while at stop or at slow speeds. That's when people tend to bring out their cell phones and start texting. And I'm going to show you a video as to why these systems should not be able to automatically resume speed from a physical stop unless it has been able to confirm that the driver is in the loop. So this is an example. The adaptive cruise control system is on. The lead vehicle has come to a physical stop. So your test vehicle has come to a stop. We have a dummy pedestrian walking in front of the test vehicle. The lead vehicle begins to move, and adaptive cruise control causes the vehicle to move right into the pedestrian dummy. How do we deal with this? The fact that, again, these are not perfect systems. First and foremost, the driver monitoring system has to verify that the driver is looking at the forward roadway before it will engage the adaptive cruise control auto resume functionality. If the system begins to move and the driver sees that, it's not detecting that pedestrian in front of me, I'm going to hit the brakes. This is why we're requiring the system to be able to verify that the driver's looking ahead. If the vehicle has been at a physical stop for more than a few minutes or a couple minutes, and to a maximum duration, then adaptive cruise control should not auto resume at all. The longer the vehicle is at a physical stop without the system actually supporting the driver, providing any physical input, the more likely the driver is going to not realize that the system is constantly at a ready to engage again. So again, this timeout function essentially requires that the driver has to, once again, provide a deliberate input to the system. It can either be tapping the throttle pedal, it can be pressing a button on the steering wheel. It doesn't have to be complicated, but there has to be some physical overt maneuver required from the driver when the vehicle auto resume has timed out that it requires in order for it to begin resuming speed again. All of this auto resume functionality, it's a driver convenience feature. It's not a safety feature in and of itself. So we need to make sure that these systems are designed in a way that, again, have a way of confirming that the driver is in the loop and the driver is ready for the system to engage again. Now, we've been talking, and so that's a way of shaping driver expectations, making sure that the driver is in the loop when these other functionalities come in. But what about ways of keeping the driver involved at the very outset? Proactive design strategies through shared control are a great way of accomplishing this. So first and foremost, this is through sharing control with the steering. So sharing control with the lane centering functionality of partial driving automation. We know that information feedback helps coordinate anticipatory driver steering behavior. So being able to anticipate turning the steering wheel in response to a curve ahead or in response to objects in the road. We also know that it's beneficial for conveying driver autonomy. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, that sense of urgency, or sorry, sense of agency, so that the driver feels comfortable being able to intervene whenever the driver feels is necessary, or even to make the driver comfortable. And it therefore promotes the driver participating from the very outset of the interaction and the relationship with the system. Also, we know that position cues, lateral position cues through the steering wheel, can help improve the driver's awareness of the system's behavior and operating status. And that can in turn speed up the driver's ability to detect situations that require further steering intervention. One thing, we're starting to see that non-cooperative steering designs actually are seen as sort of punitive, where if the driver steers and the system simply switches off, that's seen as a form of punishment by the driver, because the driver was doing what the driver is supposed to be doing, participating in the steering task, participating in the driving task, but the driver is punished with the removal of the system. And that in turn teaches drivers, or has the potential anyway, to teach drivers to give over more responsibility to the technology than it's actually designed to handle. And that's a problem. Proactive design through shared control avoids that, because the system stays on while the driver steers. It just has a better handoff between the driver and the system, depending on the input. And that way, the driver always knows what to expect from the system. This all boils down to user expectations about what the system can and cannot do, and what is happening from moment to moment, to help inform the driver about what is expected by the driver and what the driver should be doing. So at its core, what we want to make sure with our sixth category is that these systems have cooperative steering assistance design philosophies, where the system doesn't switch off whenever the driver steers within the lane. That's a critical thing. We're talking about steering within the lane. If the driver steers outside of the lane, clearly something very abrupt has been required, or something more significant has been required to require that type of intervention from the driver. And in that case, it would be appropriate for the system to switch off, because at that point, why would the driver otherwise steer out the lane without, for example, using the turn signal? So that, just want to clarify that. But at its core, when we talk about the cooperative steering assistance, we're talking about sharing control with the steering within the lane over time, so that the driver, again, is an active participant in this driving task. There is another type of design. So we've been talking about two. System stays on the whole time when the driver steers within the lane, or the system switches off when the driver steers at all. And obviously the latter is undesirable, because it goes against that cooperative philosophy. But there is a third type, which has pros and cons. This third type I'm going to show you in this video right now. This is the Cadillac Super Cruise system. And you can see that in the steering wheel, there is a green LED light embedded. I hope you can see it, but when it's green, that means that the system is providing lane centering support. When it turns to blue, that means it has temporarily gone into standby mode, where the system is no longer providing lane centering support, but it is ready to automatically reactivate once the driver has stopped steering and once the system has gained enough information to reposition itself within the lane. So I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like, of it going to temporary standby mode when the driver steers within the lane. And this is not as good as having the system switch on or stay on all the time, but it's not as bad as the system just switching off entirely. So here you can see the driver steering within the lane. This driver is making a sine wave maneuver. The system went into temporary standby mode, and as soon as the driver stopped steering, the system automatically re-engaged the lane centering. That can only be acceptable if it's clearly communicated to the driver when the system is providing support, lane centering support, and when the system is not providing lane centering support. Because what we want to make sure we avoid is mode confusion. Drivers thinking that the lane centering support is on when in fact it is off. And then that would lead to a situation where the vehicle is not being laterally supported by anyone. So again, to score well on this, we want to just make sure that the system never switches off so that, again, the driver can better anticipate the vehicle's performance, the system's performance, and also can better understand what the operating status is from moment to moment. Now, the last category has to do with established vehicle technologies that have empirically supported safety cases.
Dr. Mueller, before you move on, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
I'm curious what Dr. Mueller had found around pedestrian/bike rider avoidance and lane keeping on roads without sidewalks, shoulders, where pedestrians are sharing the roadway. I've been concerned that these systems may pit the lane centering against passing others.
That is a great question. And that is exactly why we want to promote cooperative steering. Because if the driver, I mean, ideally, driver sees a pedestrian on the side of the road or walking on the side of the road, or cyclist actually is probably more appropriate. Because again, we're talking about highway conditions in which these systems are meant to be used. So pedestrians are going to be less likely, but you can still see construction workers and so on. I mean, it is possible. What we want to make sure then is that the driver is encouraged to participate in that steering, so that obviously the default of the system is to keep the vehicle centered in the lane. But what happens if the driver wants to hug one side of the lane to give more room? We don't want that driver to be punished with a non-cooperative steering design. Instead, what we want to do is make sure that the system goes, all right, yeah, hug the lane. I'll still be here. I'll still be here for when you're ready to have me help you support again. But we don't want the system just to switch off, because then drivers, again, are not going to intervene. They're going to see the cyclist up ahead, but they don't want to have to go through the whole reactivation of their system all over again. So they're going to just let the system stay centered. And again, these systems generally don't have the ability to detect and move over and lane keep, although we are seeing that change. Some systems are offering a lane hugging, lane centering functionality when, for example, it detects like an 18-wheeler is on one side and the system just wants to give a little bit more room, because that's generally how drivers behave. Again, that is all why cooperative steering assistance promotes that driver interaction. And also, if, for example, there's some debris in the road, the system very likely will not detect it. Again, driver has to maneuver around, and we want the driver to feel the sense of agency and autonomy to be able to do that without fear of system being removed or as a form of punishment for their participation. I hope that answers your question.
Anna, did that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
But yeah, that's exactly why we're developing a testing protocol to actually address those sorts of behaviors, because we want to make sure that the driver can steer within the lane and not feel punished for it. And that can include, for example, giving over space to another road user. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, there is no clear safety benefit for partial driving automation as a whole, but there are clear safety benefits for crash avoidance features such as front crash prevention and lane departure prevention. Also, the types of crashes that front crash prevention and lane departure prevention are designed to address typically are also related to distraction, such as rear end crashes or lane drifts. We also, I don't think I have to remind everyone here that seatbelts have a clear safety case for reducing injury in crashes. So again, we want to make sure people are using crash avoidance features and that people are using their seatbelts when using this technology. So this leads us to our last category about safety features. We want to make sure that the partial driving automation cannot be switched on while the front crash prevention system and lane departure prevention are disabled, or while the driver is unbuckled. Now, if the partial driving automation system is on, front crash prevention and lane departure prevention should not be able to be switched off. And if the driver unbuckles while using the partial driving automation, the system should register that that is an unsafe behavior. And as a result, in addition to, for example, extended seatbelt reminders, it should also engage the attention reminders. And if the driver doesn't buckle up in time, it should promote the use of the emergency escalation process. Because at that point, again, the driver is doing something unsafe, and the system should not allow the driver and encourage the driver to continue that behavior. And that is the end. So, any more questions?
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. Questions or comments? Yes, Representative Shelley Kloba.
Okay, there we are. Yeah, thank you very much. I am curious about, again, with that kind of, I see this through a target zero framework where you try to make it very difficult for someone to operate in a way that's unsafe, and you engineer it so that you can't. And I've noticed that it seems some of the crashes that we've seen when people are using these partial driving automation systems have been due to the fact that they're operating on a road that is beyond or not what the design domain specified. So for instance, I think most of them, all of them are designed for a limited access highway, like an interstate freeway. What they're not designed for is the type of more maybe rural highway that has people accessing the road from a horizontal entry, and they often can't adapt to that. So what I'm getting at is a category 7 safety feature in my mind might be something like the partial driving automation system cannot be engaged when you are on a road that doesn't meet the dynamic driving situation that the equipment was designed for. So it would use, you know, the geofencing type of thing, and your geolocation, which is something that the cars are already doing. Had you considered anything like that? Like,
great question again. And yes, we have. The thing about ODD reinforcement is a lot of these systems often struggle even within their ODD. So absolutely that, you know, cross traffic is something that these systems struggle with. And so the ODD geofencing requirement is definitely something that could be implemented in the future. But right now, these systems struggle under all sorts of conditions, even the conditions which they were designed for example, restricted access highways, high-speed highways. At its core, if the driver is fulfilling, again, I keep using this term, roles and responsibilities, then the cross traffic activity, the driver should be able to detect and respond and take over complete control in response to that if the driver is in fact in the loop. But a lot of driving is a difficult task, and driving is a complex, full of complex subtasks. And the ODD, the operational design domain for which these systems have typically been designed to operate within, typically it's the lowest crash, these road conditions have the lowest crash rates. And again, that speaks to the function of restricted access roads and so on. But because it's generally boring highway free flow traffic that these systems are predominantly designed to operate in, it gets very boring. So even if the system is designed to keep the driver engaged, as I said, we have no way of actually knowing what the driver is attending to. So you can have mind wandering situations. There are lots of looked but failed to see crashes where people crashed into the very thing that they were looking at. So 100% that is something of concern. And it's, again, as I mentioned, this program is going to evolve, and ODD geofencing could be something in the future that we address. Right now, because the ODDs are in some cases not very well defined, it's difficult to have these requirements to really specify what are the exact road conditions in which these systems need to operate and not operate on, and how do they reinforce that as well. That it becomes its own can of worms. So for a first pass, this is why we kept the program structured the way it is. But absolutely, ODD geofencing has a lot of value. And interestingly enough, systems such as Super Cruise and Blue Cruise, when it comes to hands-free driving, these systems will only allow the driver to drive hands-free under those geofenced ODD conditions. Again, unclear if there's a safety benefit or even safety risk to hands-free driving in itself, but we are seeing some systems implement forms of geofencing on their own anyway. But again, the idea of requiring ODD geofencing, like restricted access to these systems has a lot of value, but how do you do it? How do you define, this metric of how you're evaluating these systems, and what does the ODD mean, especially for systems that may have a wider ODD design than another one? So yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we are thinking about, but it's much more complicated than just simply saying, well, just restrict it to all interstates, because interstates themselves, what happens if you suddenly have construction? These systems are not designed to be used in construction zones. So what happens if suddenly the portions of the interstate are under construction, heavy construction? The system might be technically allowed to operate under those zones because it's under the geofenced, roadway type, but it won't be safe for the system to be used then. So again, there's a lot of considerations into how you even define the ODD geofence restriction. And of course, that requires also map updates. And typically those map update services, the geofencing requires a subscription service as well. So, and of course that has its own problems. So yeah, first pass, user-centric designs, how do we keep people in the loop and use the systems appropriately? But obviously you can see that there's so much potential for these categories to evolve and to add more categories to, and once we learn more about how these systems are designed, how they can be designed, and how people use them with respect to the different designs out there.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. We have a question from Ted Bailey from WashDOT. Says, Dr. Mueller, what are your thoughts on near-term next steps for this working group relative to the use or consideration of the IIHS 7 category rating systems alongside AV testing and deployment regulations on public roads, which is currently focused on SAE levels 4 and 5, when these currently are not any requirements for the vehicle manufacturers to self-classify their vehicles in relation to a particular ODD and associated SAE level of automation?
So I think a way of addressing this question is to let you all know that by the end of the summer, we are going to announce our testing protocol and scoring methodology for this program. By the end of this year, it is our hope to release the first round of ratings for this program. Now, obviously, there are many vehicles available in the market right now that have partial driving automation, and it's impossible to test them all. It's also impossible to test all of them that were offered in the years leading up to now because different systems have evolved over time. However, our goal with the first round of ratings is to provide a representative sample of the technologies that are currently available in the market to help give consumers more information about the safeguards that are implemented or not implemented in their systems. And one thing that is really valuable that we've done so far with our benchmark testing and research with these systems is, first, no single system scores perfectly on all these categories, but some systems do some things really well, which goes to show that everything that we're asking for is achievable. But we want to see all of these categories. We want to see systems do well in all these categories, because one thing we want to avoid is cherry picking, doing well on some categories and not doing well on others, because as I hope it's become clear, all of these categories are interrelated. The interactions and the relationships that we have with these systems, with these vehicles, need to be addressed through holistic design where multiple factors are addressed with respect to designing these guardrails that promote proper use. Now, when it comes to, hopefully there will be a trickle-down effect of strategies that are developed in response to these categories that can hopefully be implemented in level 1 and level 0 systems. Some of them won't be possible because they rely on the partial driving automation capability. Others, however, do not. Others can very much be implemented in a level 0 system or further developed around the manual driving capability. For example, when it comes to changing the sensitivities of crash avoidance features in response to driver behavior. How do you promote appropriate driver behavior even when the system doesn't provide any sustained support? When it comes to level 4 and 5 systems, obviously level 4 systems by definition are able to drive themselves within a specific road and driving conditions. If the system has to leave those conditions, it will have to transfer from a level 4 state to lower, perhaps even manual driving. That transition is extremely complicated, and we really don't understand human needs and difficulties around that transition. There's a lot of research needed to understand the timing, the different communications, the different user characteristics, the different activities that a user was doing leading up to the point where the transition is happening. And when it comes to level 5, again, if it's a true level 5 system, the system should not require the driver involvement. There should be no human driver because the system can technically operate itself. So the focus of this program has been on level 2 partial driving automation. Even level 3 partial driving automation has its own human factors issues that may not be addressable by the categories that have been developed in this program, because again, this program was specific to partial driving automation where the driver is never supposed to exit the loop. The driver is never meant to be replaced by the system at any point. With level 3, you have conditions in which the driver is permitted to exit the loop. And again, we get into those transition issues where it's still not well understood how that transition can happen in a safe way. And frankly, those transitions will happen under a variety of circumstances that are sometimes difficult to predict. So again, that's unclear. But when it comes to how this work group can utilize the information from this ratings program, we are continuously doing research. We have dedicated research programs around partial driving automation to help inform consumers, the industry around how people use these technologies and what the risk factors are, and also what the safety benefits may or may not be. So, using data, not just from the IHS, but from wider sources, using those data to help inform consumer information strategies so drivers and consumers are better aware of what's out there, and also so they can be better aware of also the safeguards that can be implemented in these technologies. Because we have, there are some data coming out to show that when drivers understand the benefits, the purpose of these safeguards, they tend to be more accepting of it. And so that's a great consumer education opportunity to promote the general understanding about the purpose of these safeguards and why they matter in level 2 systems, why they matter in level 1, level 0, and perhaps even higher levels, around how drivers are meant to use these systems and what these safeguard mechanisms are meant to do. And what they aren't meant to do as well. So I hope that answers. I think that was a long way of kind of getting to your answer, but
it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. Thank you, Ted, for the question. Next, we have Ian Williams, and then Representative Kloby, you're on deck.
Sorry, that's an artifact. I'll lower it.
I would thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting, and I just wanted to throw out from the autonomous vehicle industry's position, just the idea, like, I think your work is really valuable because it shows that there is a set of challenges for levels 2 and below, and for all sorts of ADAS systems that, I think we would, see as being somewhat regulatorily separate from maybe the challenges for level 4 and 5, with the exception of, you mentioned the transition case. But I think given this group's focus on levels 4 and 5, there might be separate challenges for ADAS that maybe not, maybe need to be addressed by other groups. But I do think it's really important to point out that the issue of consumer confusion and the it is we as an industry are always having to vocalize that levels 4 and 5 aren't a consumer product yet. They are in testing, in development. What you're seeing on the road today are these level 2 systems. And work like yours is really important for that, to show like these are related but separate technologies and separate challenges, and more immediate challenges with these, because this is obviously on the road right now.
Absolutely. I think one thing that can be of value for the application of the lessons learned from this program, and the research around this program rather, is about the prototype testing that's happening for level 4 designated systems, specifically around the safety drivers and remote operators. There are considerations around how do you keep those people in the loop? How do you promote their ability to intervene effectively when the system, the prototype system, encounters a condition that's either ambiguous or it engages a behavior through its decision-making tree that perhaps isn't appropriate for that specific situation? Again, if you are requiring a driver to be in the loop for the purpose of intervention, even if that human is a safety driver, or if that person is a remote operator, there are still human factors considerations around that person's ability to intervene when necessary. However, those human factors issues may or may not be directly relevant to the factors that we've addressed now. I mean, if you're a remote operator, there are many other challenges that you have by virtue of not being in the vehicle. And if you are a safety driver, then there are many situations in which you are expected to not intervene, even though if the system were designated a level 2 system, the driver might intervene. There are certain considerations that definitely set apart the prototype level 4/5 systems that don't necessarily apply to the consumer available level 2 systems. But again, these are human factors issues in general. And as we talked about earlier, this is such a nascent field. How humans interact with automation in general, it's still a very nascent field. So we are constantly learning about the challenges and solutions around the human machine interactions and what those interactions even look like. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mueller. Any other questions? We are running a little bit late, so we're going to move on to our next item. Thank you again so much, Dr. Mueller. We appreciate your presentation. Those of you who have additional questions for Dr. Mueller, please make sure you email our staff. We'll make sure she gets them. So thank you so much. Okay, moving on to the AV pilot recommendation. Next, we'll hear from Scott Shogan, Vice President from WSP USA. Scott, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your attention to this. We wanted to come back to you with an update on the development of this AV pilot proposal. So this is something that you heard some about last year in our meetings. This was actually a recommendation that came out through the Transportation Commission to investigate this further in developing a more formal recommendation around an AV pilot to go forward this year. So we're glad to be with you today to kind of talk about that a little bit more, where we're at in this process. And this is maybe your 5-minute warning that the executive committee members, we're going to be seeking some feedback from you via Mentimeter as usual. So have your phones at the ready here. We're going to be coming to you with that in just a minute. So, as I stated before, just a minute ago, one of the recommendations that came out from the Transportation Commission last year was to advance an AV pilot program to really work through this year to establish the scope of the plan, report back to the legislature, and put them in a position to act on it during the 2023 session. So we've developed this outline and kind of a framework for this pilot at this point, for this recommendation, I should say, really focusing on the goals and objectives. What are we trying to accomplish with this pilot program? How the pilot would be actually structured, the administration of that, who are the kind of the parties and the players in that, and what is the role of the work group as well in that process. And we'll talk about each of those here in a bit. So from a goals and objectives standpoint, really kind of three principal umbrellas, if you will. A key one is equity. And this is all fed in from a lot of the polling and discussions that we've had over the last 2 years in terms of where to focus some of those work group energies. Equity, really an important one, looking at transit accessibility, how AV technologies could support that. Could support disadvantaged communities, or understand what are some of those barriers to access to the technology and how can we overcome them. All really important elements to this. Public awareness is a big part of this program and what we would be looking to achieve. Helping the public understand capabilities of the technologies, helping educate around safe use, and really measuring opinion about the technologies as well, kind of all important components to that. And then finally, organizational knowledge. So helping agencies that have a role in implementing AV technologies really kind of understand what is needed of my agency. What types of skill sets do I need to have to help position and implement these things? And where are the gaps in terms of kind of current, current skill sets or current structural, elements of agencies? What types of partnerships are required to really pull off, executing elements of these technologies? Of course, regulatory considerations. What are some of the gaps in that framework today to really enable these technologies to go forward? And just generally preparedness. What's how ready is the state overall from a regulatory standpoint, from an agency readiness standpoint, understandable to be able to act on that as well. So again, I gave you the warning. We're going to go to Mentimeter as we have many times with this group before. We would just want to start by just kind of baselining again against these goals that we just talked about, and make sure that we're still on the right track. This is kind of a synthesis of goals and priorities that we've gathered over the last 2 years. Just would love your feedback here in terms of whether these goals are the right ones, whether there's anything that you would tweak or consider differently in terms of these goals to advance the program. So I'm sure you've probably done this before, but if not, go to menti.com right at the top of the slide here. Use this code 66720718. That should open this. Open the poll here for you, and we'll see if I need to do anything magical to update this. Let's see if we can get
Yeah, it's not letting us in.
Oh, really?
Scott, it let me in, but it gives me a question. If you answered maybe or no to the previous question, please expand here.
Yeah, so that's the next question, actually. So that will actually go to in a second here, but interesting that you were able to get in, but others were not.
I'm actually in with the same exact problem. It seems like we're on the question after the one you're showing on the screen.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay. Well,
there we go. Now we have the right question. Are these still the right goals and objectives to drive pilot proposed development?
So let me just try to advance to that, and hopefully we'll at least see those results. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we've at least got a few of these in. Okay, I think we're back on track. We'll give this a second here for executive committee members to weigh in here. I think we've got about 20, so we'll just give another quick second here. All right, so not seeing the numbers change here. Looks like we're close. Let's advance it forward. So you were asked the follow-up question. If there was a maybe, what others are missing, let's move ahead to that one. With any luck here. Doesn't seem to want to let me go. And it's advancing right past that. This is the last time we'll try to embed this in there. Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Okay, great. Okay, so now it looks like we're populating with thoughts that you may have here in terms of goals. So, so safety and encouraging safe deployment. Kind of first one on here. Just give it a second for. So we'll let some of these come in here. Seeing a safety theme. What problem is being solved for the public? And I know this is one we've heard before, and is certainly an important consideration. And I think part of why we're structuring around this thought of a last mile connection, we'll talk about in just a minute. So a question in here, kind of embedded in, who will benefit from the pilot, public or private sector? I think very much the intention based on how this is being structured is that really the public and state government is really the intended kind of beneficiaries, if you will, from this in terms of the learning opportunities, the exposure and kind of measuring public input. That's really the goal of the pilot here. So some great information there. Really appreciate your feedback on that. So let's talk a little bit about this this use case. What we've settled around based on the goals that we had set here is looking at a last mile solution to increase accessibility to transit. And we want to look at this in multiple contexts. Urban transit systems certainly, but also looking at small city and town settings as well. A smaller small town transit agency as well, looking at trying to understand how those what are different accessibility barriers, what are different applications to this technology in different environments around the state. So just to be perfectly clear, if you're not familiar with the terminology, last mile really meaning how can we bridge the final gap between perhaps a fixed route transit system and that end destination for users in a way that makes an appreciable difference in access to transit. That's really what we have decided to try to target with this pilot and have incorporated into this proposal. So, what is this approach? What is our intent with this? First of all, this is not intended to be a way far out on the bleeding edge type of pilot approach. This is a type of approach and type of technology we expect is, has been deployed many times now. It's really looking at, how to fill a gap with a technology that has been already relatively, tested and deployed a fair amount. We talked about testing in multiple different settings, and exploring those impacts to different types of communities is really important here. Again, expanding public awareness and exposure is a big part to this. How can we get people to kind of touch and feel this technology? And how, in the process of doing this in these types of contexts, can we identify different equity considerations, both in terms of how different populations are impacted differently, and how this technology can help reduce inequities as well. So in terms of this process, we're really at a point of engagement right now. Obviously, we're engaging with you today. We're engaging over the course of the summer. We'll talk a little bit more about schedule, but we're engaging with transit agencies. We're trying to understand a little bit better transit agency interests in partnering with this. We've been working with the Washington State Transit Association and trying to get some outreach with their members, as well as industry interests. We're planning on doing a request for information to help understand not only interests, but help really identify cost implications as well. And really working through and discussing scope and potentials for innovation through that process and that outreach as well. So just in terms of a little bit more nuts and bolts on the approach, we've started to outline some proposal criteria. We'll actually talk about that more on the next slide. Some of the required documentation for pilot execution. So just outlining what are the pilot program participants going to have to provide as part of this, a safety plan, a concept of operations. What's this pilot going to look like? How is it going to function? Kind of all of that documentation to reach some assurance on a sound plan for executing. User surveys that would have to be conducted, just outlining those requirements, as well as a summary and findings report coming out of the pilot. So there's some responsibility for some, some follow-up documentation through this, really talking about those lessons learned. And then finally, a report to the legislature as well, as part of this pilot program going forward. So in terms of criteria for selection of proposers for this, really focusing around goals and objectives, trying to understand how well the pilot proposal would achieve the goals and objectives that we've set out. Certainly qualifications and past experience of the team proposing to execute the pilot, the plan for execution, a narrative around how the pilot would actually be carried out, how the outreach would be carried out, as an example. And then finally, plan to address regulatory and stakeholder requirements and hurdles. So how can you overcome some of those challenges to actually get that pilot on the road? Okay, so we're now back to Mentimeter. Hopefully this will work a little smoother this time. Really just want to gauge support based on what we have outlined here. Support from your organization, or if you don't, tell us more. We've got a follow-up slide, and be happy to open it up just for open mics as well here. So we'll give this a second.
Scott, it's not updating on your end, but there are 13 responses. There it goes.
Okay. So I think we're pretty close to the numbers we had hit previously. So it looks like we've got some still in the not sure or don't support category. You've probably gotten to skip ahead here onto the follow-up question. But again, I'm be happy to, you're welcome to put your answers in there. Happy to just pause here as well for any dialogue if you want to unmute yourself and share any of your thoughts here as well.
Any committee members that want to speak, please just let me know. Justin.
Yeah, sorry, I am trying to toggle between this and a transportation demand management meeting. And Rima and I have talked about this issue, and she's coming to one of our meetings, particularly focused on the small rural agencies, to talk a little bit about what they would need to see move forward to get this going. And I know there's sort of some examples out there. What I mostly am trying to do is expectation management for many folks on this call about what this can do versus what we're already doing. And I don't want us to lose sight on what today public transit is trying to do already. The technology is new, and I will say the resources on our public agencies is tight in terms of staffing and skills. And so for staff, my first initial comment is, like, if there is a pilot project, it's got to come with all the resources. It's got to come with the technology, the human resources for operating and training, because a lot of agencies just have the inability to expand what they're already doing in a very tight job market, hiring market as well. But I do look forward to engaging with Rima and our association on what public transit agencies might be able to help guide in the development of a pilot project.
Thank you, Justin. Other questions, comments? Yes, Anna.
Yeah, this is Anna. I guess my question or concern around something like this is how it would actually benefit underserved communities, and any more than, it would be taking resources and staff time away from other last mile or other transit expansion programs. And so I'm not unclear what benefit it has over those, other than, providing an opportunity for companies to test out their products in our market. But as far as actually serving the people who aren't being served well by public transit, is this going to work any better than existing last mile pilots or expanding transit service? And I don't see the benefit at this point, with the technology being what it is.
Yeah, and if I can address that, I think that the idea here is really recognizing, AV technologies are coming, and this really represents, obviously this is the AV work group. We're looking for ways to understand kind of how to expose and study and evaluate, the implications of this technology. I think the idea here is to really look at how can AV technologies help be part of that solution. Certainly, they're not the only solution. Certainly, as you said, there are current last mile solutions that are being deployed in different places as well. I think the idea is, how can they be part of that solution, and testing them in a real world context to say, what are the barriers to access to that for disadvantaged communities? How can we kind of understand that better and plan better? And perhaps it is, regulation, perhaps it's more tactical. As time marches on and as this technology gets, becomes more proliferated, how can we understand that better and understand how to react to that market? I think that's really the expectation here. To be clear to another point that you said, this really is not going to be private companies testing their technology. I think the idea with these pilots is, this is technologies, most likely an AV shuttle or some sort of technology where they are not in a testing mode for it per se, but really, deploying it, on a for-fee basis for users to use it as a service and use it for these types of contacts. So it's not expected that this is paying for a private company to do their research. That's not really the expectation with how this is being structured.
Thank you, Scott. Call on you in just a second, Ted. One of my questions to the group is, if this is not the best case scenario for a pilot, then what is? I believe that our next step is to move forward with a pilot so that we can provide the legislature with the information that we need in order to support AVs as they arrive in our state. But at the same time, I understand Anna and others here have some concerns. So if this is not the pilot that you're thinking will help the community or help us to better understand these technologies, then what is? I'll open that to anyone. Okay, no answers. Ted, you go ahead.
Well, I felt inclined to step in here, just given that I've been personally really involved in the development of this pilot. You know, if you reach out nationally and you think about what is it that we could do that the private sector can't do by itself, that actually needs public investment if there isn't much to do on the infrastructure side. And let me speak to infrastructure for a second. The Infrastructure System Subcommittee brought to the commission, who brought to the legislature, 2 investment priorities for infrastructure, for pavement markings and smart work zone data. And so now we've gone through 2 years of pandemic, and we have 7 different subcommittees that need a reason to come together that is something around something tangible that is happening in our state. From my perspective, the need to come around shared ride, a robo-taxi, given what is desired to be deployed in the foreseeable future by the private sector, that isn't there yet. The companies that are here are mapping roads and doing, I would say, you know, safety driver in the vehicle, just evaluation, right? But as far as the proposals that I've seen be presented in Lakewood, in Mercer Island, in Renton, in Bellevue, are around an AV shuttle, but from the informing policy, public education perspective. Is a pilot that costs, let's say it's going to be $1 million investment. Is this going to move the needle on bringing people to switch modes or to really address a person throughput problem? No, but that, in my perspective, that's not what we're trying to address. We're trying to give people a reason to come to the table, to explore safety, to explore workforce, to think through something that's tangible, that hasn't been possible to just do while we follow what's going on in other states. And so I think it's important for the forward momentum of this group to encourage the legislature to invest in something. It's not the current recommendations that are on the table, again, pavement markings for level 2 technology that's on the road today, or real-time work zone data. Well, then a pilot that gives people a reason to come to the table to explore all the equity and safety and data sharing privacy issues around a tangible project. And that tangible project needs to be owned by a transit company, a transit agency rather, because that's who's going to be responsible for all the work, right? And of course, they'll reach out to cities and counties and local stakeholders to get it done. And so that's my encouragement as somebody who wholeheartedly supports this pilot, for why I said, let's move ahead with this kind of a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Rima, and then Kelly, you're on deck, and then Brian.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Ted. I think that was great perspective and context as we've kind of worked this with the staff level with our staff work group. But I think looking at these comments, it's important to maybe give a little more context that we really are looking at this as kind of tipping our toe in the water, not necessarily to contemplate this pilot as being going to be answering a number of questions. It really is a first step at both giving public exposure and to helping us better understand the potential for what AVs may be able to do or not do, and how that may help resolve last mile solutions, in addition to those that are under discussion today or being tested today. So it's not not to suggest that the ideas and solutions that are out there today that don't involve EVs are not good ones, but in looking to the future, as we look across the country, the contemplation of really the first step of AVs that we're likely going to see in most cities, in urban settings, most likely, is some form of fixed route shuttle. And how does that help move people as we think about also encouraging people to take transit and mass transit and other forms of transportation to get to where they need to go. So I think we kind of see it as a one piece in a much bigger puzzle, but that would help augment and help us understand what promise does this hold for future connection.
Thank you, Rima. Kelly?
Hi, yeah, kind of singing to the choir here, just kind of adding on. I think SDOT's position here is seeing how we can kind of drive industry towards higher occupancy application of AVs. And so, you know, I think there's complications and concerns brought up that are very valid. But to Rima's point, if our focus is on the backbone of our transit system and moving high occupancy vehicles, reducing congestion and increasing accessibility, I think this pilot could give an opportunity to really kind of signal to the market that those are the type of applications that cities and public agencies are looking to support and learn more from, again, to help drive industry towards outcomes we want to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Kelly. Brian?
Yeah, so fully supportive of the pilot and doing a pilot. Obviously, there's a lot we can learn in terms of safety and use case. My main concern is this, you know, the idea of sort of the last mile, where this is sort of the last mile on transit. The experience we've seen across this country is every time you change modes, so somebody has to get to the transit station one way, they change modes, take transit partial way, change modes again, and do this as the last way. You lose quite a bit of interest. I would much rather see this pilot somewhere where there is not mass transit deployed, whether it's you know, from airport in certain areas, or whether it's downtown Bellevue or downtown Seattle on routes that are not currently served by mass transit. Because again, this point to point A to B is what's critical. If you start adding multiple points and multiple modes, you're going to lose interest quite a bit. So my concern is not the pilot, fully supportive of it and the learnings we can get from it. It's just the implementation in terms of what the, you know, how we basically build the route that makes sense in terms of getting people interested.
Thank you, Brian. And I couldn't agree with you more. I also believe that, you know, as we're looking at urban environments and things of that nature for this pilot, we should also be looking at rural environments as well. And a small city should be part of that test as well in, you know, central or eastern Washington, I think.
That's great. Thank you all for that feedback. And I'll note also in the chat, Anna, you see you're asking about kind of the process for how the feedback is going to be shared, is going to be used in revising the priorities. So we're going to talk about schedule a little bit more here, but you know, this is really kind of a foundational piece to advance this recommendation over the course of the summer with other input. So we'll get to schedule on that in just a little bit.
Other questions or comments?
All right, well, let's keep moving then here as we get towards the break. Just want to talk a little bit about kind of administration, how we see this being executed. So what we see really is a lead state agency being established by the legislature. You know, if they advance this, and that agency is really facilitating, you know, providing coordination and oversight over the overall program, being the funding recipient that's then actually procuring this pilot. Transit agencies, you know, clearly, you know, we see as having a key role here. We want this to be integrated, you know, with a transit agency as part of their service mix. So they're going to have a key role in helping develop out that pilot concept and integrating with their transit service. And then certainly there's going to be industry partners involved, providing the vehicles, technical and program support, a lot of that support that Justin mentioned previously. You know, we see, you know, likely industry partners being involved in helping do some of that lifting as part of the pilot activities. So what is the role of the work group? This is an interesting question because of a timing question, really. So the idea is that, that this would be advanced through the legislature in 2023. Next year is also the year that the work group sunsets. So the work group is really going to have a role. We think here in some of this early activity, what we're doing today, obviously developing goals and objectives, ultimately signing off on a pilot recommendation, and receiving updates through that development and solicitation process for the pilot opportunity. And then potentially, if the work group is extended, the work group could serve in more of an oversight role over this process. But as of right now, we expect that a pilot would be getting contracted really around the time that the work group is sunsetting. So your efforts right now are really laying that foundation, importantly for the success of the pilot. So, as I mentioned, this summer, we're developing this pilot recommendation. We're taking the input that we are receiving today to update that recommendation, as well as this outreach with the transit community, with the AV industry, getting, gauging interest, getting more details about what they may need for this to be successful. We expect that we're going to be refining that recommendation with that input in the fall, presenting to the Transportation Commission and the work group executive committee in our fall meetings. And then ultimately at the end of the year, submitting, hopefully if this is successful, submitting this in our annual report to the legislature with this recommendation, and looking for legislative activity next year in the 2023 session. So let's see if this updates. So just we've got a place for you to put it here into Mentimeter if you so prefer. But again, happy to open it up for questions or any final thoughts or comments here before we close this segment. Anything anybody wants to share?
Yes, Representative Kloba.
Yes, so I do understand and appreciate the comments that we saw about, whether last mile is the correct use case. But I think what I'd like to emphasize, and I think I heard a little bit of it from Kelly from SDOT, that one of the key things when we think about what can we do that industry won't necessarily do or can't do by themselves, and that is figuring out a way to do it so that it is accessible to folks with movement disabilities and for whatever reason can't or don't drive, and then making sure that it is not single occupancy vehicle. And even when it's, what I mean by that is whether it's just one person hopping into an AV that's going to drive them to where they want to go, or a group of friends getting in all together. I still consider that sort of a single occupancy. So really moving us towards looking at where the real potential for this is, that does not include the kind of increase in traffic and increase in greenhouse gas emissions that we see with the current TNC situation. I would really like it not to be just a glorified TNC. So I appreciate the direction we're going here.
Thank you, Representative Kloba. Brenda.
Yeah, I guess trying to figure out where to fit this thought in, it seems like the broad scale deployment of the technology is a little ways out. I mean, it's probably closer than many of us think. And I guess it would be interesting if we were able to find a way to focus some of our work on the next generation of people that are using that technology, because I think that what you find is there are a lot of people like myself who, drive cars and feel like we're always going to drive cars. But if you're working with, folks in college or in high school or in those programs and finding a way to familiarize them with that technology, it makes it easier as the transition towards a more automated technology comes into play. And so that's not a fully formed thought or a proposal, but it's just, something we might want to think about.
Thank you, Brenda.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, Scott. Appreciate your presentation. I know we're going to go ahead and take a break. We did cut into our break a little, so I'm going to take it to noon. We all need to come back by noon. I know that Representative Kloba is going to present to us after lunch, and she has a stop dead of 12:15. So we'll make sure we get you in there, ma'am. Okay, go ahead and please stay connected to the meeting. Go ahead and turn your cameras off and mute your microphones. Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and call this meeting back to order. First up will be Representative Shelley Kloba, who's going to give us a legislative update, and then Rima will take over after that. Representative Kloba, sorry, I know you're eating. Apologize.
No, it's okay. Absolutely. All right. So I think many of you probably followed along as we went through the legislative session with regard to AVs. But hopefully this will just be a little bit of a review. And maybe, Rima, you can stop me if you feel like I'm covering the territory that you're going to cover later. So we basically had three bills. 1731 was the one that I sponsored. And then we had 2070 and 2100. And those were sort of related to each other. The higher number one replaced the lower number one. The thoughts that I had on the bill that I sponsored, well, it was heard in transportation. If I remember right, it was the same day as 2100 was heard, and it did not get an executive session, didn't pass on past the transportation committee. I think part of that was the competing bill. I think that part of it was that, generally speaking, our transportation committee is not deep in the knowledge of AVs and what the work group is trying to do. So I think impressing the urgency was difficult. Just as a review, my 1731 was meant to be an update or a follow-on to the bill I had in 2020 that passed fairly overwhelmingly, which was House Bill 2676. And that one, Rep. Banky had co-sponsored, and when we passed it, there was conversation that I had with a variety of folks in the industry who wanted to come back to it and kind of continue having that conversation, which I said, of course, let's do that. And if you'll recall, 2020, the session ended right around when the COVID was taking off. And so the 2021 session was really intensely focused on issues around COVID. And so that conversation really needed to be put off. And Senator Wen had a bill that delayed the implementation of that 2676 until October, coming up this year here. So anyway, 1731 was an attempt to come back to that and have that conversation, revisiting the idea of the self-certification, and that perhaps there needs to be some higher standard if there will be the testing is done without a human driver in the car. It increased the amount of information and involvement of not only law enforcement, but also first responders in case of, you know, any kind of a crash that would need the fire service or ambulance or what have you. And then it tried to incorporate some of the work that the manufacturers and software developing companies and partnerships are doing and are being required to do by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA. They had done some great work in the intervening time, and definitely wanted to incorporate that. But the bill did not pass, and you know, that was disappointing. I think for, you know, as we move into the next legislative session, it sounds like increasing the knowledge base of our folks on the Transportation Committee would be a helpful thing. I'd like to see, again, more of a consumer focus and a public safety focus, being able to coordinate with first responders more than we do. It will be interesting to see the regulations roll out in October, or the implementation, I guess, of some of the requirements that we have of the companies. And I am excited about this pilot project, particularly because it will help to build some of the core competencies that we need to see in the relevant agencies. I think, you know, it is still very much a learning curve for all of us. And, you know, that's complicated by wonderful strides and innovations and advancements that we're seeing in this industry and in the technology, which is, you know, really pretty exciting. So I think trying to keep up is going to continue to be something that I certainly will continue on. I think it's important to continue to emphasize data collection. As a legislator, one of the hardest things to do is make a decision on a policy when you do not have sufficient data. And a lot of times going after the data to try to collect it after the fact is very difficult and expensive. And so setting up the infrastructure so that we are collecting the data on the front end, I think is a really important piece for us as we try to build our knowledge and understanding of what any of the issues are, so that we as a state and the variety of agencies that we have can be partners in trying to smooth out some of the issues that come up that would be on our side of the equation. So I really think that the data collection is important for that. So yeah, I hope to continue on with the conversations that we've had. I hope to understand a little bit better. Representative Benke, you know, co-signed on my 1731 and then presented a bill that was essentially the opposite. So that was, I think we'll need to have some conversations to figure out where our common ground is and what we can work on together. But open to questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Kloba. Questions for Representative Kloba? Not seeing any. I think they're letting you off the hook.
Okay, all right. Well, you know where to reach me. It's Shelley.kloba@ledge.wa.gov. And I am always happy to have conversations about AVs. And unfortunately, I will often talk people's ears off. So I think I have a like-minded crowd here, so I invite them.
You're among friends, Representative Clovis. Speaking of which, Senator Nguyen, did you want to say anything about the legislative session and your bill?
I can jump in real quick. I don't know if I have too much to add. So mine was 5828. Close the door. It's kind of loud outside. And I think the whole point of what that legislation was trying to do was differentiate not necessarily the widespread adoption potentially of AVs in the future, but also just encouraging the development and the industry here in Washington State. So as of this last session, I don't think any AV companies were currently testing in Washington. The only one that had been was Zoox, and that was because they were doing a partnership and eventually was bought out by, I think, Amazon. So for me, you know, we have, I think, 40 people or so on this call. I wanted to make sure that we're focusing our efforts in terms of what outcomes we wanted from this work group. And for me, I thought that the outcome was to try and encourage the development of these and manufacture them hopefully here in Washington State as well. So my point in that legislation was, how do we actually encourage them to come here to Washington State and to actually test, which they aren't doing now. And that was kind of part of the conversation with the stakeholders around that bill. Obviously, with the pandemic, there are other urgent things that needed to be discussed, but that's one way that I'd hope that we can pivot on this task force, is not just kind of talking it in hypothetical forms, but also what can we do today to actually ensure that we get some of this technology here in Washington State. And if the goal is to not, then that's also fine too. Let's be clear about that, because I know that there are some folks who are kind of on that mindset. But that was kind of my perspective and why I ran that particular bill, not necessarily meant to downplay any other concerns that are out there, but that was the hope for me.
Thank you so much, Senator Nguyen. Representative Kolbe, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I will apologize. I did not look at the details of 5828, and which is the same as the Banky Bill 2070. But I have forgotten what were the main ways that Senator Nguyen, you saw that that bill would encourage more companies to come here. What was sort of the mechanisms that were set up there?
Yeah, there's already national reporting systems that these companies already utilize. So instead of having a separate one for Washington State, employing something that's a bit more consistent as well. Probably the most contentious one, though, is the moving violations in terms of having that data. And I think that's also already available. And we're talking, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 cars. So their VIN numbers are already available as well. So more so just trying to streamline that whole process so it wasn't kind of a legal quagmire for folks to be able to have their cars here.
Yeah, and I think that that goes back to the, it might be, you know, the term readily accessible. If it's information that they have to report, say, to NHTSA or someone else, just having an additional way to report it to us because they are operating in our state, I thought was important. As I, back at that time, and it may well have changed, I'll need to check on it, even though they were reporting to NHTSA, it was very difficult to even find anything about any of the things that they were reporting. And the website at that time, if once you found it, said that they weren't displaying that information yet. So again, in trying to make sure that we have the data that we need so that we can understand if it's only 3, for instance, who have a moving violation, that's good information for us to have. If it's 20, if it's 100, that's also helpful information. It helps us to direct what are the things we need to be worrying about or not worrying about. But until we have that data and it's put on a plate and sat in front of our agencies, that I don't think we are doing the public the kind of.
Well, we technically have that data available now because there's no testing in Washington State, so the data is null, right? So I don't disagree with you that we need to have it. I also would like to see how we can partner with these companies in order to actually have them be testing here and develop them here.
Yeah, but in the states that do require the data, they also have testing, so that's not the barrier. But we should have a separate meeting because you are one of the people that will talk endlessly with me about AVs and where we can go with that. So I appreciate that.
Other questions, comments, or questions for Senator Nguyen or Representative Kloba? So I see we're joined by the chair of the House Transportation Committee, Representative Jake Fye. Representative Fye, I know you've already asked or answered this question for me in the commission meeting, but I'm wondering if you might weigh in on your thoughts regarding AVs and a pilot program in the state.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I think that if there is to be a pilot, it needs to be well planned, and the timing needs to be the right kind of timing. So I don't subscribe to the notion that just having a pilot keeps momentum going. I think it's got to be the right thing. It's got to serve some purpose for the state of Washington, and you know, obviously the efficacy of doing a pilot has to be weighed against everything else we spend our money on. So my biggest concern, though, going back to it, is making sure that the timing is just the right time to do it, and then it has to be something that is going to be useful for this period of time. So I'm open to hearing other people's reactions to it and having a further discussion about it. I just would sort of, to punctuate the previous conversation, short session, we did a major transportation package. So not every bill makes it through the legislature, and you've got to make tough choices about what things need to happen. And my single focus was getting that package done along with many other legislators. So, and we did. There's always another day for the legislature, and so we can certainly take up more AV related bills in the upcoming session.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work that you did on getting that package passed. It's an important piece of legislation, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that plays out in the future. So, other questions or comments for our legislators? Seeing none. Rima, you're on deck.
Well, Commissioner, they pretty much covered what I was going to cover, which was just to give a super high level summary of their bills. So I don't really have much more to add. Representative Banky's bill, I don't believe he's here, was pretty much the same as Senator Nguyen's in terms of what it was trying to do. So I don't have anything further to add. But if I could, I would like to ask a question maybe of all the legislators. Just kind of what they're thinking is long-term about the requirement to have a safety driver in the vehicle, regardless, I guess, short of it being a level 5, right? So what is your thinking around in law requiring a safety driver, let's say in levels at least up to 4 or not, noting that the governor's office's executive order currently does contemplate an opportunity for testing without safety drivers while they're still in the test mode.
Do we have a legislator that'll take that question?
I think we lost Representative Kloga, so maybe just Senator Nguyen is.
Senator Nguyen, would you answer that?
I mean, me personally, I'm probably more receptive of technology that could seem scary to other folks. So I'm personally fine with it as long as it's been tested and vetted and has that designation in advance. But I don't necessarily know what that might necessitate in terms of a policy recommendation.
Other questions, comments? So I would just add my 2 cents, Rima, and that's from a technologist standpoint of view. When we're talking about beta testing software and things of that nature, I see no reason why there can't be a safety driver in the vehicle. You can have the safety driver, you can give the safety driver instructions not to do certain things in order to test out whether the technology works, but you can't replace the safety driver if there isn't one there and you need one. Other questions, comments on this item? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the AV roadmap for the future, key component, public outreach. Scott Shogun.
I am back and hopefully sharing my screen.
Yes, you are.
All right. All right. Well, hello again, everybody. We want to talk a little bit, again, a topic that we've touched on with you previously in terms of this roadmap to the future. So as we're looking ahead, we mentioned the workgroup sunsetting next year in 2023. We've kind of talked about and started laying the groundwork for a legacy document of this group, essentially, this roadmap to the future that's really capturing kind of path forward based on where we've been, what we're seeing in terms of trends in the industry, and really what are kind of those next steps after the work group is sunsets next year, that the state should be taking to continue to prepare for AVs. So we've outlined this legacy deliverable, really bringing this at the end of next year, and focused it around kind of key components, agency readiness, testing and pilots, which certainly we talked a lot about the pilot piece of it today, public outreach, safety, and finally path to deployment. So we're planned to kind of go through each of these topics over the course of the next several meetings with the executive committee. And today we're going to start with public outreach and just take a dive into this, share with you a little bit of our kind of initial thoughts on where we're planning on taking this. And again, just putting you on notice, prepare to give us some feedback again through Mentimeter as we work through this presentation. So just moving on from there, what are our overall goals in terms of outreach? Why outreach and communicate on this? So certainly just communicating about AVs in a comprehensive, transparent, and equitable way, talking about this space as it relates to the broadest set of people, increasing awareness amongst the public and stakeholders, and really understanding needs from different perspectives is ultimately a key objective with why do outreach. So obviously there's been a lot of activities already done to date, not the least of which is this very work group that we're all sitting on here today was a huge step in the direction of linking together a lot of different agencies with industry stakeholders and nonprofits and academia, and a lot of different types of stakeholders from around the state and around the country that are really kind of dictating this path forward. We also stood up the website for the work group, so we've got a platform for sharing information out. We've started newsletters as well. And the Transportation Commission did an ADAS survey. Was working on the ADAS survey, as another kind of opportunity to get some feedback as well. So a lot has already happened here. We don't want to exclude anything. We want to use this as kind of our first polling question because we know a lot of subcommittees and a lot of different groups have been conducting outreach in different ways right now. Just want to take a quick initial shot to say, what did we miss? What other activities did you want to make note of in the outreach spectrum that you or your team has been involved in? So we'll give this a second for responses here. Or obviously, if anybody wants to go open mic on this as well, you're welcome to. Don't see anything coming in there, so certainly feel free to jump in and throw a hand up if we missed anything there. So let's pivot again to looking ahead. So again, we're kind of thinking about from this legacy document standpoint, after the work group is complete, kind of what are some of the priorities, what are the audiences that that the state needs to try to reach in continuing to further this technology. So we've kind of categorized them into three broad categories: policymakers and implementers, those that are impacted by or may benefit from the policies, and policy influencers. So we're going to dive into each of these in a little bit more detail just to kind of provide some examples. So as we think about policymakers and implementers, elected officials, certainly we just heard a great rundown on kind of the legislative agenda here. Some of the key agencies and departments as examples of those stakeholders. What is the goal here? Certainly to continue to inform policy, to understand what are the needs to protect public safety, to encourage testing and deployment in a safe fashion, what have you. How do we continue to build policies to support that? And how do we see those happening? That's really through targeted discussions. A lot of those are going to be more, one-on-one types of discussions, as well as potentially, some successor forums to the work group that may potentially, link together some of these stakeholders for these discussions, and legislative briefings as well as kind of a key part to that, that pillar of communication there. So pivoting to those that are impacted by or may benefit from these policies, a number of different examples of stakeholders here. So let's first look at law enforcement and first responders, as well as local governments that maybe haven't been as plugged in to this dialogue. So from a goal standpoint, educating and informing agency procedures around how to address AVs, as an example, law enforcement protocols on, how to approach AVs and, recognize the differences in enforcement on the roadway with AVs, just as an example of that. Understanding, are there state level policies that may need to change to address that and support those needs for these stakeholders? And a lot of this coordination and communication can really happen through state level associations. Just looking at kind of the low hanging fruit of where we've got, groupings of these agencies that we can reach them in a broad sense to really get a better understanding for their needs, and communicate out information as an example for those. Transit agencies, we talked a lot about in the pilot discussion, educating and getting feedback on the potential for AVs to support operations, and again, any needs potentially for state level policy to support their introduction of AV technologies. So again, statewide associations provide an opportunity. Justin and his group as an example. Also, experiential engagement, we'll throw this in here. Really, the pilot concept is in part an opportunity for transit agencies to get to understand this technology better, how it may fit within, within their services and their skill sets, to be able to deploy that as well as kind of an important learning opportunity and informational opportunity there. The general public, this is a topic we're going to talk about more today because this is, of course, the hardest group to reach in a broad sense. So, but what are the needs to reach them? Well, first of all, educating on safe use of AV technology is an important, and critical part of that. And also informing policy from a wide range of perspectives, of public perspectives. Two very important goals in terms of public outreach and education here. And how could that happen? And we're going to dive in. We're going to ask you for some feedback on this in a minute. Certainly broadcast media can be a part of that. Focus groups, experiential through, pilot types of opportunities. There's a lot of ways we can reach the public. It's more challenging to keep your foot on the gas with this. So interested in thoughts and priorities from this group here in a couple minutes on this. So moving now to policy influencers, a lot of potential influencers in this space, from technology companies to the TNCs, other private companies, advocacy groups, really all, helping to kind of understand their policy priorities and concerns as it relates to their constituency or their product, whatnot, how policy affects that, and what their priorities are. And in terms of how to target, certainly one-on-one discussions, but certainly I think the work group has provided that opportunity, and potential successor type forums could possibly supplant that as well.
Scott, we have a question from Brenda.
Yeah, hi there, Scott. When you were back on those impacted by, I just wanted to flag that there's not a slide that calls out workforce, and also workforce development, like community and technical colleges, and partnering in that way to identify the skills that are going to be needed, or the skills gaps that we'll need. And workforce is not just drivers, it's workforce that is going to maintain the technology, workforce that's going to implement the infrastructure, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment, Brenda. Appreciate you catching that. All right. Finally, and this may touch a bit on what you were just commenting on, Brenda, academia in terms of the policy influencers, really informing kind of, process through policy research as kind of a key element that academia can provide. I think the other side to that is exactly what you were talking about in terms of kind of the needs assessment and what academia may need to kind of recalibrate to support this environment as well. So again, kind of one-on-one discussions, forums such as this, really important to furthering that communication as well. So diversity of input is critical to this. As we frame out this public outreach, pillar of the roadmap, this is going to be an important piece to it. And that comes in multiple ways. First of all, range of the infrastructure users, be it whatever modes you're participating in, or using the infrastructure, and then also a focus on equity. Oops, sorry for that. Really a focus on equity with this, in terms of understanding input from communities of color, from immigrant communities, income based considerations, disabilities, seniors, a lot of different populations that we need to really understand how they are affected by this and have that informed policy along the way. Now I will click the slide and go into this. So really want to get, again, pivot back to kind of that general public and an understanding around kind of your thoughts on the importance of outreach to the general public, and what are those priorities there. I think when I flipped this slide, I screwed it up, and you might be getting, are you getting a question on kind of relative importance of different goals? Somebody that's filling it out. There we go. I think Markel is doing some magic in the background, which is great. Okay, so this is really our first question here. We're now seeing kind of the results in here. Just trying to understand, what are the most important elements, from your perspective, that we need to be communicating to the public about, or the goals of that communication to the public. And I think we're seeing some great results here in terms of kind of alignment into what those priorities are. So it looks like, initially some heavy weighting towards safety and input with regards to equity. We'll kind of give this a second here. looks like we're seeing some amount of movement still, but generally those priorities kind of still coming out on top in terms of safety and equity, a little less importance around kind of the state of the industry, some importance around, using public input to inform policy more broadly. All right, not seeing any more movement here, so that's great. Thank you for that input. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So this really gets kind of to methods. What do you feel are the most important methods, opportunities for that public engagement out of kind of a variety of different approaches here? Give you a second to work through this question. Not sure if anything is coming in here, Markel.
Yeah, we've got 8 responses so far.
Doesn't seem to want to refresh for me. Let's see if this does it. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So now we're getting some input here. Looks like participation in community events, focus groups, less emphasis on media and really a little bit more hands-on engagement, it looks like, are kind of the priorities here. Great. All right, well, let's move on from that. Oh, we're moving on from that. That was it in terms of our presentation on this topic. Any other final thoughts or questions?
Yeah, Scott, if you want to back up a slide, there's one more question that might load.
I thought there was. I think we're gonna have to rethink this embedding Mentimeter in the PowerPoint. It seems a little more trouble than it's worth right now. To get some feedback on this. So what other activities should the state explore for AV readiness in terms of outreach? So do a pilot. I feel like it seems to align well with a topic about an hour ago. Any other feedback or thoughts on this one? Great. Important consideration there. Okay, not seeing anything else popping up. Again, I'll open it up. Anybody who wants to raise hands for any other questions or thoughts here before we close this segment. Okay, getting in a few other things. So some good feedback here. And I think, an important point, and that's why we're really diving into the questions on the public outreach. Public outreach is expensive. It's hard, it's complicated. What are some of the opportunities? Pilot could potentially be, not only kind of experiential, but a little bit of earned media type of opportunity as well, possibly. And I think all those types of strategies are really where we're trying to find that sweet spot in terms of what are the goals and what is a kind of a cost-effective way to achieve that. So,
Scott, we have a question from Ted Bailey. Ted?
Thank you, Chair Restucci. Yeah, I'm just looking at the results from the last question, and participation in community events, focus groups, public meetings were all identified as top priorities. Those are the most expensive and most time-consuming, and the ones that require investment in agency staff and consultant support to have the expertise and the bandwidth to go and do those things. And so I would encourage this group to continue to right-size a public outreach with the resources appropriated to this effort. So thank you.
Yeah, important point, Ted. Thank you. All right, now it looks like we're really not getting anything else in. Any final thoughts or comments from anybody? All right, then that concludes this segment. Thank you, everybody, for your input again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Any additional questions for Scott? Okay, moving on. Next item is the AV industry presentation. And we have Katie Stevens, Head of State and Local Policy at Neuro. Katie, are you there?
Hi, I am. Can you
Hi,
guys see
there
and
you
hear
are.
me?
Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Great. So thank you, everyone. I missed the first part of the meeting, but looks like quite an agenda. Thank you for allowing me to spend the time with you to talk through a little bit about Neuro. As Chair mentioned, I'm Katie Stevens. I'm Head of State and Local Policy for Neuro in the West. Prior to Neuro, I had the privilege of working on transportation and tech for about 15, not 50. Wow, that would age me quite a lot. 15 years. And I've had the pleasure of really spending quite a bit of time in Washington State. I worked at eBay before this a few years ago, which has a presence in Bellevue. And then what feels like an absolute lifetime ago, I staffed House Transportation Infrastructure Committee for former Congressman Brian Baird from Southwest Washington State. So spent a lot of time from Vancouver to Olympia. Anyway, got to spend a lot of time in your beautiful state. So about Neuro, our approach is building a service that will deliver anything to you faster than getting it yourself safely and for an extremely low cost. To do that, we uniquely develop, build, and deploy this battery electric autonomous vehicle that you see here. It's specifically designed for goods delivery. So these vehicles will never have a human inside it. We call it zero occupant. They're the size of a small sedan. So they operate entirely on roads, not on sidewalks, not in bike lanes, and according to all motor vehicle laws. A little bit about Neuro. So we are founded in 2016 by former members of the Google self-driving car team. We're headquartered in Mountain View with over 1,300 employees now. We have operations in Arizona, in the Scottsdale area, the Bay Area in Los Angeles, Houston, Texas, and a manufacturing and testing track in Las Vegas. We were the first in the world, we say world, definitely in the US, to deploy a fully autonomous delivery service. We did this back in 2018 with Scottsdale with Fry's, and tremendous support from local community and the state. Other partners include CVS and Walmart, Domino's. Show you a video, but you may recall the commercials of our vehicle avoiding the Noid last year. And then Chipotle, FedEx, and food banks in the Bay Area and Houston during the pandemic. We're also the first and only AV company to be approved for an exemption by US DOT around equipment, which I'll talk about in a bit, and the first to receive a commercial deployment permit in California. Again, unique to Neuro, we develop the software, we design the vehicle, we own the fleet, and we operate the service in partnership with these retail partners. How it works, just briefly. So you place a delivery on our partners app like Fry's or Domino's and opt in to receive autonomous delivery. We then text a link to you, the customer, so you can track the order and the progress. Then we text you an access code to get the delivery at your door, so to retrieve it. So the doors will open. You can't really see it from this, but you saw it in the picture before, the visual before. The doors open, and once you're done grabbing your items, you press done on the screen and the doors will close. Brief video for you. I have 2 small children, so that lights me up. Hopefully it does you as well. So I think this is just a problem statement, right? What we have today on our roads is simply not working. I know I feel it every time I take my kids to school or go to work or go to the store, and I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, feel the same way. We have congestion that's driven by single occupant vehicle trips, pollution, inequitable access, and rising traffic fatalities. Our current model of commerce involves a huge time cost. So of the 220 personal vehicle trips each year in the US, 43% of them are shopping for shopping and running errands. That means almost half of all personal vehicle trips could be made without anyone in them at all. And why is that important? Well, roads are getting more dangerous. Road injuries and deaths are at record levels that you all know well. NHTSA just released its latest full year 2021 fatality figures, and they're unfortunately stunning. 43,000 people died on our roads last year in the US. That's a 10% increase over 2022, which was historically bad. Many of you know, most fatalities on our roads since 2005. Much of the increase since the pandemic began has been behavioral. So alcohol and speeding fatalities are each up by more than 20% since 2019. And there has been a 13% increase in pedestrian fatalities since 2020. Our focus is moving goods instead of people, which allows us to address community challenges. So we'll take these one at a time. Safety. So road injuries and deaths, as I mentioned, are at record levels. With neuro, there are 0 occupants, right? So we can keep those outside of our vehicle safer because of autonomy in our form factor. We will never drive distracted or drunk. That burrito or those groceries inside the vehicle, will never be unhappy that it's a minute or 2 late. We'll never get frustrated. The world is moving to electric for carbon reduction. We are fully electric from the beginning. That was our founder's vision and implementation of this company. So we'll help reduce emissions and move us closer to energy independence. Equity. Our deliveries will be more affordable because of autonomy and therefore more widely available to underserved communities. So during the pandemic, I mentioned briefly, but we partnered with Houston Food Bank to make more deliveries to families in the 3rd Ward, which is an important historically Black community in the city. This area is also a food desert and a place where it may not be served if delivery is just deployed in a radius around existing supermarkets. This technology is also critical for people with disabilities, older Americans, and those who can't drive or have good access to transit. And then jobs. So we're creating new jobs at Neuro and with our commercial partners. We've launched a training program for electric autonomous vehicle fleet technicians with community colleges that I'll show you in just a minute. I mentioned briefly, but food deserts. So more than 20 million low-income people in America live in food deserts. So that's more people than the entire population of New York State. Delivery is, as you know, very expensive today, and those who can benefit most are currently priced out. Our service, our vision is to cut the cost of delivery extraordinarily and make it broadly available and more equitable. We commissioned a report by Steer Group, which is a firm of transportation experts, and they analyze the impacts of AV delivery services over a decade, so it's 2025 to 2035, and they found services such as ours would create and sustain more than 3 million jobs, simulate economic growth, generate a total of 4 trillion in economic impact, improve safety, avoid hundreds of thousands of serious crashes and injuries, protect the environment, avoid 407 million tons of CO2. That's equivalent to the residential emissions over the last decade from the 4 largest cities in the US. And then avoid 8,000 tons of fine particulate matter emissions from tailpipes, brakes, and tires. So this is a forecast on an emerging industry, and only the middle of one of 3 scenarios they considered, but shows how the impact of technology really could be substantial. These jobs that I mentioned are not abstract. What Steer predicted would happen over 10 years is really starting right now near our home in the Bay Area. So we've partnered with De Anza Community College to create the nation's first training program for electric and autonomous vehicle fleet technicians, including a free tuition option and preferred hiring. So these, individuals, community college students go through the program. They have the opportunity to work at Neuro while they're going through the program. Because we believe there shouldn't need to be a trade-off between education and having a job and employment. And then once they finish their first is 2 certificates. So 1 certificate, 2 tranches. So once they finish the first leveling, they have access to become a junior fleet technician, and they have opportunity for promotion after completing the full certification, which should take them no more than 2 years. So we're expanding this to all operational areas that we're in currently, and hoping these programs will train the next generation and improve Neuro's access to talent, which is so difficult to find these days. So we're optimized for goods delivery. So we're focused, our focus on goods delivery allows us to rethink vehicle design and really build an integrated hardware and software platform that's optimized for goods, not passengers. So you're looking here at 3 generations of Neuro's custom vehicles. One should actually have side mirrors, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but our first generation, you don't see it here, but it should. The first and second gen were 25 miles per hour. Those are low speed vehicles. We have our R2, our second generation is on the road now in the Bay Area and in Houston. And our 3rd generation vehicle will be the world's first and best automotive grade, mass manufactured, goods only autonomous vehicle. So our aim for this vehicle is to ultimately be able to go up to 45 miles per hour, and we'll also have a low speed version as well. One of the big wins we get from a 0 occupant vehicle is that we can really double down on the safety and design. We don't have to fit 2 people side by side, so we can make the vehicle narrower and therefore much safer in some of the hardest cases. You can see an example right behind me, which is the cyclist next to the R2, and there's plenty of room, right, for those micromobility users, those vulnerable road users. We don't have to protect people inside the vehicle, so we can really take 60 years of safety innovation designed for the cockpit and literally turn it inside out and put it on the outside of the vehicle to protect other road users. Here you can see an example of that, which is our custom external airbag. These innovations are really only feasible in a 0 occupant vehicle. A little bit about our operations. We're currently testing or deploying commercial operations in 3 large markets. So Houston, mentioned before, the Bay Area, and the greater Phoenix area, and we're mapping and testing in Los Angeles. So these markets have a number of things in common. A state regulatory structure that allows commercial deployment of AVs, and this includes equipment exceptions, which again, I'll talk about in just a little bit. Support from local government and community, all excellent in the areas we serve. Good proximity to commercial partners is essential for our business. Good network of low-speed streets and reasonable weather. And in all those markets, we've successfully completed deliveries, including the driverless pizza deliveries, which you saw with Domino's. So experience from these pilots and deployments has allowed us to evolve our product and vehicle into the 3rd generation platform we plan to scale, and obviously to enter new localities. So compared to passenger vehicles, this next 3rd generation vehicle will provide a much better experience to end consumers, including active heating and cooling. So somebody could get this could result in batching, right? Somebody could get their ice cream with one door opening and the rest of their groceries in a cooled environment, and the next house could receive their, their Domino's pizza that's, in heated cabin, in the next door, or could receive number of FedEx packages, right, in lockers or something else, and that could be several batches, going to several houses. So we're really looking at maximizing the opportunity for these trips within the Neuro vehicle. It will support greater than 500 pounds in payload mass, and what's wonderful is it will obviously continue to be fully electric. I wanted just briefly to touch on one of the public-private partnerships we have, which we're really proud of. We believe goods delivery has really become a critical way people get their items, and is especially valuable for those who can't conveniently drive to the store. So in Houston, we partnered with Houston Metro, TTI, so Texas A&M Transportation Institute, Texas Transportation Institute, and Kroger on a pilot. And our aim was really to learn how to deliver service, how a delivery service powered by autonomous vehicles could benefit people with disabilities, really providing another option in addition to Metrolift's scheduled ride program. As an alternative to reserving 2 rides to the grocery store and back, customers could choose to place a quick online order with Kroger and have their fresh groceries delivered to their home at no cost.
Katie, we have a question from Ted Bailey.
Sure.
Katie, can you expand upon what you mean by the markets where you are deploying allow for scaled commercial operation? Does these jurisdictions define the difference between testing and deployment in a specific way that you can describe?
No. So when I say that's strictly from a business standpoint, so we are looking at metros that have like retail partners in the vicinity, simply, right? Like Domino's is there, right? Chipotle is there, FedEx is there, and they have maybe a pretty robust presence. So our commercial partners are located there. In the states where we operate, it has a path to commercial deployment. It allows for commercial deployment, right? So it's may have testing, clear testing authorization, but also clear deployment authorization. So in California, it has a 3 permit process. In Texas, it's a regulatory structure that allows for all at the same time. Nevada is very similar, and Arizona is very similar.
Thank you.
Is there another question before I go on to the policy piece?
Nope, looks like we're good.
Oh, great. So just a couple more slides, and then I'll stop there, and you can ask some additional questions. So common regulations across the states in which we operate, they have explicit authorization, as I mentioned, for AV operations. Several key pieces of this is an exception to state motor vehicle equipment laws that support a conventional human driver, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Minimum insurance requirements for AV operation. This is very standard. Requirements that AVs are capable of achieving a minimal risk condition, so they can safely come to a stop if they run into an issue or pull over. Law enforcement interaction plan provided to a state agency in advance of operation and when updated. We just updated our law enforcement interaction protocol or plan. It's on our site. I think I included a link to this on this page. And then when we update it, we also resubmit to our state agencies counterparts, and they will help circulate it. We also provide it robustly to our local PD and work with them on demos and trainings for them, making sure that they're very clear on how to interact with their vehicle. They ask questions that help inform the next iteration of our law enforcement interaction protocol. So it's a constantly evolving document that we work on in partnership with our law enforcement colleagues. And then as anything, legislation requirements are clear, achievable, and provided on a swift timeline. I want to talk a little bit about this. So we have a pretty nuanced issue. So vehicle rules that are meant for traditional cars, right? That really limits the introduction of novel vehicles like this zero occupant vehicle. So we're saying that all federal motor vehicle standards really need to be modernized to provide the full benefit of regulatory certainty for us. That means updating things like manual control rules, which I'll talk about. But DOT made some progress this year. They updated rules for occupants. So making it clear you don't need a seatbelt in a vehicle, for example, with no humans in it. This was called an occupant protection rule. So there's nobody in the vehicle. I shouldn't need side view mirrors. I don't need, a seatbelt. I don't need an airbag. There's really no creature comforts I need, or, there's no driver to protect. There's no passenger to protect. NHTSA released an occupant protection rule that dealt with some of that, and we've received this great exemption for lack of additional rules around it. But there's been no proposals on manual controls like pedals, wipers, wide mirrors, or dashboard indicators, which is just another nuanced issue, but provides us the certainty we need to be able to move forward and scale the service. So even though it's a primarily federal issue, most states have their own vehicle codes that that duplicate or expand on the federal ones. When the feds update their rules, that doesn't automatically repeal state rules. So just like traffic laws need to be audited to clarify how they apply with no human driver, vehicle equipment code we're asking should also be audited to remove any requirements that have no benefit for safety, but could limit novel vehicle designs. We've passed this in states like California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, everywhere we operate. It's very non-controversial. It just makes sense. But yet it's, lower hanging fruit. It's just, there are things that we need to do within the law that never anticipated a vehicle without a human in it. And so these are, sort of cleanup measures we're having to get into place. And Washington's current testing law doesn't address this yet. So that's potentially an area for movement. But with that, I will end and thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Katie. Questions or comments for Katie? So Ted has a question. Let's see here. Katie, would you happen to have summary information relative to which states are working on and or remove the low hanging fruit on slide 24, pedals, mirrors, etc.?
Yeah, we can definitely provide. I think there are 10 states that do that now. So let me follow up, Ted. And by the way, it's great to hear from you again. Follow up with you and provide those states.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
Okay, Rima.
Thanks, Katie. This was really good. Can you, just on the visual, I was wondering, reach access, if you're in a wheelchair, for example, to that screen, does it drop down, or if you weren't able to reach it, how would you get access to your goods?
No, that's a really great point. So we're, as I mentioned, we're developing our 3rd generation vehicle, and in doing that, really approaching via our user research team, having a number of really robust conversations with disability organizations. So in Arizona, I don't know if you know Ability 360, but if you don't, it's the most amazing facility to help persons with disabilities there in Arizona. But convened a number of people, organizations at the table to talk about, run through questions. What are their concerns and issues, around accessing our vehicle? The HMI screen that you just mentioned is one of those, right? We've actually spent time with people that utilize wheelchairs, and they're able to access the HMI. Obviously, concern has been, I can't quite reach to the back, right? I can't get in. I may not be able to get all my goods to me. And so we're looking at a number of workarounds there. There's also, some concerns that were raised in this Ability 360 roundtable, which was, in Scottsdale, at the end of or Phoenix, at the end of my driveway, I've got gravel, and I don't have my wheelchair, doesn't effectively go over that gravel. So when you roll, how do you know, how do I know that when you come, how will you know when you come to my house that you'll need to move, to a point at which you're beyond that gravel, just those things. And then, things like on our screen, Rima, like it says, please, we originally said, please stand back, after talking with a number of these, people that have the challenges, we decided, that should really say, please move back. It's a verbiage that matters, those little things, as well as the much larger things. And we continue to improve upon that.
Wonderful. Thank you for that response and question. Other questions or comments for Katie? Yes, from Shelley Baldwin. Thanks, Katie, for the presentation. Can you say a little more about states with reasonable weather? Would this work in Washington?
Oh, our vehicle could operate in Washington State. I think that it could certainly operate in Washington State. We obviously wanted to start, our first place we located, like a lot of other AV companies, was California, Arizona, where it's relatively flat and weather is, it's less rainy, warmer, it's good weather most of the time. But we also operate in Houston, right? And we have to pull our vehicles off sometimes. And we're learning from even driving with the weather. As we handle more complexities, weather-wise and terrain-wise, we could certainly enter most areas in Washington State eventually. I think it's appropriate to say that, we're not scaling extraordinarily quickly. I think that's very good news, right? We're deliberate. So we're mapping and testing. We're doing a lot of mileage and simulation. And then we're, redeploying it and testing and mapping. And so I think that we will get to Washington State, certainly. It's not going to be tomorrow, but in the meantime, we're setting the stage, right, for opportunities to develop policy opportunities so that we know when we're developing our plan 5 years down the road, which we are, right, we're looking 5 to 10 years, that we know there's that business certainty where we could go to a state like Washington and deploy there. So it's not insurmountable by any stretch.
Thank you, Katie. Another question, this one from Rima. Per your framework list, how do you define minimum insurance requirements?
Yeah, I think we look at, what existing insurance standards for, an automobile on the road. But in many cases, like in Arizona, it'll have commercial liability. I believe it's a 1 million policy. It does vary, Rima. And I don't know if you have a side-by-side, but we certainly can provide some examples. It does sort of vary, but it's well within, it's like, I want to say 500,000 to, 5 million or whatever it is, commercial liability coverage.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Going once?
Who wants a Domino's pizza after seeing that?
I know, I want Domino's. I agree. Other questions? Okay, looks like they're letting you go, Katie. Thank you so
All
much for
right.
your presentation.
Thank you. You bet. Thanks for the time. Take care.
Take care now. Okay, moving on to the exec committee members' items. This is an opportunity for any member of the committee to voice any concerns about things that we talked about today or things that you want us to talk about in the future. So I'm opening up the floor to anyone who wants to speak. I'm not seeing anything. Okay, I know of no other business to come before the committee, and I would adjourn the meeting if there's no objection. Seeing no objection, so ordered. We are adjourned as of 1:06 p.m. We're early, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.